Rachel Winter's 5 free-time frame trembled as Navy SEAL Commander Howard Mason placed his legendary Barrett Chapter 50 cal into her hands. Around them, the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy had fallen silent. 200 of America's elite marksmen watched in disbelief as the soft-spoken 22-year-old from Montana prepared to take a shot that seasoned snipers had been attempting all week. "Show them what practice really means," Mason whispered, his voice carrying the weight of a bet that could end both their reputations. Nobody knew that 6 months earlier, Rachel had been banned from 3 shooting ranges for being too inexperienced and a liability. They were about to find out why that assessment was dead wrong. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy as Rachel Winters walked through the imposing iron gates, her worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder, and a thermos of black coffee warming her hands against the crisp Virginia air. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their ancient silhouettes watching over the 60-acre facility that had become a mecca for America's most skilled marksmen since its founding in 1979 by Vietnam-era snipers seeking to preserve their hard-won knowledge. The academy grounds stretched across a secluded valley, its multiple ranges designed to challenge shooters in ways that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. American military personnel in their desert fatigues mingled with law enforcement officers in tactical blacks and grays, their conversations revolving around grain weights, wind calls, and minute adjustments that separated experts from masters. The air carried the distinct smell of gun oil and brass, a scent as familiar to these men as cologne or aftershave. At first glance, Rachel looked like she'd taken a wrong turn on a hiking trail. Standing barely 5'3" with shoulder-length brown hair tucked under a faded Montana Grizzlies baseball cap, she moved through the testosterone-heavy environment like a ghost. Her clothing was practical but unremarkable. Worn Levi's jeans, scuffed hiking boots, and a simple navy blue jacket that had seen better days. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses framed eyes that were a startling shade of blue, the only feature that might cause someone to look twice. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged among the tactical gear and military bearing that dominated the academy. No shooting patches adorned her clothing, no regiment insignia or competition medals hinted at experience. She carried herself with neither the swagger of competitive shooters nor the disciplined posture of military personnel, just quiet determination that went unnoticed amid the confident specialists around her. The registration desk was staffed by Jeff Bradley, a former Marine whose facial scars told of Fallujah without a word being spoken. He looked up from his clipboard as Rachel approached his eyes, immediately cataloging everything about her that seemed out of place. Young, small, no visible gear beyond a basic rifle case. Definitely not military. His expression remained neutral, but his voice carried the slight edge of a gatekeeper who'd seen too many tourists try to play in a professional's world. "Help you, miss?" Bradley asked, his tone suggesting she might be lost. "I'm here for the open practice sessions," Rachel replied, her voice carrying a soft Montana accent that seemed to make her sound even younger than her 22 years. "I called yesterday about range availability. Rachel Winters." Bradley consulted his logbook, finding her name among the day's reservations. Rachel Winters. No organizational affiliation listed, no competitive ranking, no instructor endorsement. Just someone who'd paid the daily fee and requested access to the basic rifle ranges. His eyebrows rose slightly as he noted her Virginia address. "First time at our facility?" Bradley inquired, pulling out a clipboard thick with safety waivers and range rules. "Yes, but I've been shooting for several years back home," Rachel said, accepting the paperwork. "I'm studying at UVA and wanted to continue practicing while I'm here." Bradley nodded with the patient expression of someone who'd heard similar claims hundreds of times. "International students? college kids with hunting backgrounds, recreational shooters. They all arrived with inflated confidence in their abilities, usually based on putting holes in paper targets at indoor ranges or taking down deer from fixed positions. They rarely lasted more than a few sessions before realizing the Academy's standards were far beyond their preparation. "Well, safety briefing starts in 15 minutes in the main hall," Bradley said, gesturing toward a low-slung building at the center of the facility. "All new shooters are required to attend before accessing the ranges. After that, you'll be assigned to Range 3 for basic qualification." Rachel thanked him quietly and moved toward the briefing area, aware of the subtle glances that followed her. Not hostile, just dismissive. She'd experienced the same reactions at every serious shooting facility she'd ever visited. The assumptions were always the same: young woman, basic equipment, no visible credentials, probably can't shoot beyond beginner level. She'd long ago stopped trying to correct these impressions with words. Chapter 2. The Dismissal. The morning briefing area was filled with the Academy's regular attendees. A mix of active military personnel on training rotations, law enforcement officers maintaining certifications, and serious competitive shooters preparing for national-level events. Men and a few women in their 30s to 60s, with weathered faces and practiced movements that spoke of thousands of hours behind triggers. Many wore unit patches or competition medals that silently established their credentials without a word being spoken. Rachel found a seat in the back row, pulling out a simple notebook and pen, while others around her displayed sophisticated range-finding equipment, ballistic calculators, and custom gear that cost more than most people's cars. Conversations around her revolved around yesterday's performances, equipment modifications, and upcoming competitions. No one attempted to include her. The invisible wall between established members and obvious newcomers remained firmly in place. Sergeant Mike Reynolds, the Academy's chief instructor, began the daily safety briefing with military precision. A former Army Ranger with multiple combat deployments, Reynolds moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in environments where mistakes meant death. His silver-flecked beard and deep-set eyes spoke of experience that couldn't be taught in classrooms. "Welcome to day 76 of our spring session," Reynolds announced, his voice carrying to the back rows without apparent effort. "Weather conditions today include variable winds from the northwest 5 to 12 miles per hour, with potential gusting to 15 after noon. Temperature starting at 54 degrees, climbing to 68 by midday. Visibility, excellent. Barometric pressure, steady." The experienced shooters nodded, making mental notes of conditions that would affect their ballistics throughout the day. Rachel recorded every detail in her notebook, her handwriting neat and methodical. Reynolds outlined range assignments, equipment restrictions, and safety protocols, while Rachel took careful notes. Around her, experienced shooters half listened to familiar information, their attention focused on equipment checks and personal preparations. "New faces today," Reynolds announced, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Rachel. "Remember, this isn't a beginner facility. We expect professional standards from everyone, regardless of background. If you're not prepared for that level of commitment, the recreational shooting club in Charlottesville might be more appropriate." The comment drew knowing chuckles from the regulars, who recognized it as Reynolds' standard warning to newcomers who might be in over their heads. Rachel simply nodded and continued taking notes, seemingly unaffected by the indirect challenge. As the briefing concluded and shooters began moving toward their assigned ranges, Rachel gathered her simple equipment and headed toward Range 3, designated for basic rifle practice. She'd requested the most elementary setup available, a decision that further reinforced everyone's assumption about her skill level. Staff Sergeant David Parker, a Marine Corps instructor who'd been using the Academy for advanced training courses, watched Rachel walk toward the basic range, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder, rifle case in hand. "Check out the tourist at Range 3. Parker muttered to his shooting partner loud enough for others nearby to hear. Probably thinks this is like those carnival games back home. His partner, Detective Ray Coleman from Richmond SWAT, chuckled while assembling his precision rifle. Give her credit for trying. Most people are intimidated enough by this place to stay away. She'll probably fire a few rounds, realize she's in over her head, and find somewhere more suited to her experience level. The conversation, like dozens Rachel had overheard before, washed over her without visible effect. She'd long ago learned that responding only reinforced the stereotype of the defensive novice. Instead, she continued toward Range 3, her mind already shifting to the focused state that had become her sanctuary over years of practice. Chapter 3. Rachel's Secret. What nobody at the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy knew was that Rachel Winters had been preparing for this moment far longer and more intensively than anyone could imagine. Back in her small apartment near the University of Virginia campus, her modest living space told a different story than her unassuming public persona suggested. The tidy one-bedroom unit contained few personal touches, no posters on the walls, minimal decoration, nothing to suggest the personality of its occupant. But the desk that occupied one corner revealed Rachel's true focus. Its surface was covered with ballistics charts, wind calculation tables, and meticulously detailed shooting logs that stretched back 4 years. 3 large binders contained printed articles about long-range shooting techniques, atmospheric effects on bullet flight, and the mathematics of precision marksmanship. Her bookshelf held texts on internal and external ballistics, the history of military sniping, and technical manuals for various precision rifles. A laptop displayed a ballistic calculation program with custom formulas that would have impressed military ballisticians. Every evening after her university classes, Rachel spent hours analyzing shooting data, memorizing ballistic coefficients, and studying the subtle art of precision marksmanship. The truth was that Rachel hadn't simply been shooting for several years back in Montana. She'd been obsessed with it. Her father, William Winters, had been a Special Forces sniper who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan alongside America's most elite units. When Rachel was 18, a casual introduction to target shooting had revealed an almost supernatural natural ability that stunned everyone who witnessed it. William had been skeptical at first. His daughter was studying international relations, spoke 3 languages fluently, and seemed destined for diplomatic work. She showed no interest in military culture and had never expressed fascination with weapons. But when she consistently outshot experienced marksmen at the local gun club in Missoula, William realized she possessed something genuinely rare. Under her father's careful guidance, Rachel had spent the last 4 years developing skills that went far beyond casual practice. She learned to read wind patterns by watching grass movements and heat mirage. She mastered the mathematics of ballistic trajectories. She developed breathing techniques that slowed her heart rate and steadied her hand. More importantly, she learned to find the almost meditative state where external distractions disappeared and only the target existed. William had taught her that true marksmanship wasn't about proving superiority over others, but about achieving perfect harmony between mind, body, and equipment. Rachel approached shooting like meditation, finding a zen-like state that made her incredibly accurate but also virtually invisible in competitive environments where ego and showmanship typically ruled. What even William didn't know was that Rachel had once been scouted for the U.S. Olympic youth shooting team. Her natural talent had caught the attention of Olympic coaches during a regional competition she'd entered on a whim. The invitation to join the development program had arrived the same week William had returned from his final deployment with severe PTSD that left him unable to sleep and battling demons no one else could see. Rachel had made her choice without hesitation. She withdrew from Olympic consideration to help her father through his darkest days. When her name was subsequently removed from the elite development program, she accepted the decision without appeal. Her father's well-being meant more than medals or recognition. This private sacrifice had shaped her approach to shooting, excellence pursued for its own sake, not for acknowledgement or acclaim. During her exchange year in Virginia, Rachel had researched every shooting facility within a 2-hour drive. The Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy was legendary among serious marksmen, known for its challenging courses and elite clientele. She'd been planning to test herself there for months, carefully timing her visit for a period when she could commit to regular practice without academic distractions. Her equipment, while appearing basic, was actually carefully selected and precisely calibrated. The rifle case contained a custom-built Remington 700 that her father had helped her configure specifically for long-range precision work. Every component had been chosen for accuracy rather than appearance, resulting in a weapon that looked unremarkable but performed at levels that would surprise most observers. Rachel had also spent considerable time studying the Academy's layout through satellite imagery and promotional materials. She knew which ranges would be most suitable for different types of practice, understood the facility's protocols, and had even researched the backgrounds of key instructors. Her preparation was thorough but invisible, exactly as William had taught her. Most importantly, Rachel had learned to manage expectations. She understood that her age, gender, and apparent background would lead to immediate assumptions about her capabilities. Rather than fighting those perceptions, she decided to use them as camouflage, allowing others to underestimate her while she quietly demonstrated what real preparation could accomplish. Chapter 4. The First Test. Range 3 stretched 300 yards from the firing line to the primary target positions, considered a basic distance at the Academy where serious precision shooters regularly engaged targets beyond 1,000 yards. Standard paper targets had been supplemented with steel plates at varying distances, each painted with numbers that corresponded to scoring zones. As Rachel set up her position, she was aware of the subtle attention from nearby ranges. Several experienced shooters had positioned themselves where they could observe the newcomer's technique while pretending to focus on their own practice. The Academy maintained a formal policy of welcoming all skill levels, but the culture clearly separated the serious practitioners from what they considered tourists. Range Officer Phil Hutchinson approached Rachel's position with the patient but slightly condescending manner of someone who'd seen hundreds of overconfident newcomers. A former Army Ranger with 23 years of service, Hutchinson had developed a sixth sense for identifying shooters who were about to waste everyone's time and possibly create safety concerns. "First time at a precision facility?" he asked, noting Rachel's basic equipment setup with practiced assessment. "First time at this facility," Rachel replied carefully. "But I have some experience with long-range shooting." Hutchinson nodded with the expression of someone who'd heard similar claims countless times. Experience could mean anything from hunting deer with a basic rifle to actual precision work. Given Rachel's age and appearance, he assumed the former. "Just want to make sure you understand our standards here," Hutchinson continued. "We're not set up for basic marksmanship training. Our targets start at 300 yards, and most of our regulars are working on shots that would be considered advanced at other facilities." "I understand," Rachel said, checking her rifle's bolt action with smooth efficiency. "I'd like to start at 300 yards, if that's acceptable." Hutchinson's eyebrows raised slightly. Most newcomers requested closer targets, working their way up to longer distances as their confidence grew. Rachel's immediate request for 300 yards suggested either unusual confidence or dangerous overestimation of her abilities. "Your call," he said, walking toward the target controls. "Fair warning, though, our 300-yard course uses precision targets. You'll need to maintain groupings under 2 inches to continue using the advanced ranges." From the neighboring shooting positions, Rachel could hear the subtle shift in conversation as word spread about the new shooter's ambitious target selection. Experienced marksmen began paying closer attention, some out of genuine curiosity, others anticipating the entertainment value of watching overconfidence meet reality. Captain Lisa Martinez, an Air Force combat veteran who ran advanced marksmanship courses, positioned herself where she could observe Rachel's technique. Martinez had seen her share of talented young shooters, but she'd also developed a protective instinct about maintaining the Academy's reputation for excellence. 2 inches at 300 yards, Martinez commented to the shooter beside her. That's entry-level precision work. If she can't maintain that standard, Hutchinson will bump her down to the basic ranges where she belongs. The academic nature of the conversation irritated Rachel more than outright hostility would have. These people weren't being deliberately cruel. They simply couldn't conceive of someone with her appearance and background possessing advanced shooting skills. Their dismissal was so automatic, it felt like natural law rather than prejudice. Rachel completed her rifle preparation and moved into shooting position. Around her, the Academy's morning rhythm continued, with experienced marksmen discussing ballistics, wind conditions, and equipment modifications. She was included in none of these conversations, treated as an observer rather than a participant in the serious work of precision shooting. Range 3. Your 300-yard targets are active. Hutchinson's voice crackled through the intercom system. You have 20 rounds to establish your grouping. Academy policy requires consistent precision to maintain advanced range access. Rachel chambered her first round and settled into the shooting position that had become as natural as breathing. Through her scope, the target seemed impossibly small and distant. Exactly the kind of challenge that had attracted her to precision shooting in the first place. Around her, conversations continued with the assumption that this challenge would quickly expose her limitations and send her to more appropriate training venues. She took a slow breath, found her natural point of aim, and prepared to show the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy what 4 years of disciplined preparation could accomplish. Rachel's first shot broke the morning silence with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through the spotting scope at the range control station, Phil Hutchinson watched the bullet impact and blinked twice, certain he'd misread the target. The shot had struck dead center, creating a perfect hole in the bullseye that would have impressed him coming from any of the Academy's veteran marksmen. "Beginner's luck," muttered Staff Sergeant Parker, though his tone carried less certainty than his words suggested. Rachel worked her bolt action smoothly, chambered her second round, and fired again. Another perfect center, hit this one so close to the first that it enlarged the existing hole rather than creating a new one. By her fifth shot, even the most skeptical observers had stopped pretending this was coincidence. Detective Coleman lowered his binoculars and exchanged glances with Parker. "That's not luck, that's technique." Rachel continued shooting with mechanical precision, each shot finding the center of the target with consistency that defied explanation. Her breathing was controlled, her position stable, and her trigger control so smooth it seemed effortless. More importantly, she showed none of the nervous energy that typically accompanied exceptional shooting by newcomers. She wasn't excited by her accuracy. She was simply executing skills she'd clearly mastered long ago. Range Officer Hutchinson found himself making excuses to linger near Range 3, ostensibly checking equipment, but actually observing Rachel's technique. Her fundamentals were flawless. Proper cheek weld, consistent sight picture, natural respiratory pause timing. These weren't skills that could be faked or stumbled upon accidentally. They represented hundreds of hours of disciplined practice. After 15 rounds, Rachel's target showed a single ragged hole barely larger than a dime. At 300 yards, this represented shooting that most competitive marksmen would consider excellent on their best days. For someone who'd walked in off the street with basic equipment and no academy credentials, it was approaching the impossible. Captain Martinez approached Rachel's shooting position during a pause between shot strings. "Excuse me, miss. I'm Captain Martinez, one of the instructors here. I was wondering if you might tell me about your shooting background. Rachel looked up from her rifle, her expression pleasant but guarded. I learned from my father back in Montana. He was military, taught me the basics when I was younger. The basics, Martinez repeated, glancing at the perforated target that told a very different story. What branch of service was your father in? Army Special Forces, Rachel replied, offering no additional details. She'd learned from experience that mentioning her father's sniper background often led to assumptions that she was trading on his reputation rather than demonstrating her own skills. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Special Forces training was highly regarded among professional shooters, but that still didn't explain the level of precision she was witnessing. Have you done much competitive shooting? Your technique suggests considerable experience. Some local competitions, Rachel said, which was technically true, while completely understating her consistent dominance of Montana precision shooting events. I mainly shoot for personal satisfaction rather than competition. This response frustrated Martinez in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Rachel's shooting was clearly at a level that demanded recognition, yet she seemed completely uninterested in claiming credit for her obvious skills. Most shooters at her level would be eager to discuss their achievements, compare techniques, or demonstrate advanced capabilities. By her 20th shot, Rachel had created what appeared to be a single enlarged bullet hole in the center of her target. The grouping measured just over half an inch, well within the Academy standards for advanced range access, but achieved with an ease that suggested she was operating well below her maximum capability. Range 3, excellent shooting, Hutchinson's voice came through the intercom. You've qualified for advanced range access. Would you like to move to longer distances? Rachel considered the offer while cleaning her rifle. Moving to longer ranges would attract more attention, potentially leading to conversations and scrutiny she preferred to avoid. On the other hand, 300 yards wasn't really challenging enough to constitute meaningful practice. Could I try the 500-yard range? She asked. The request surprised Hutchinson, who'd expected her to gradually work up to longer distances over multiple visits. 500 yards was serious precision work, the domain of advanced marksmen who'd spent years developing their skills. Even experienced shooters often struggled with the additional variables that distance introduced. 500 is available on range 7, he replied, curiosity now completely overcoming his initial skepticism. As Rachel packed her equipment to move ranges, she became aware of the subtle attention her shooting had generated. Conversations at nearby positions had shifted to include speculation about her background and training. Several instructors had found reasons to observe her shooting, and a small group of advanced students had begun watching her technique between their own shot strings. The attention made Rachel uncomfortable not because she doubted her abilities, but because she preferred the anonymity that allowed her to focus purely on the technical aspects of shooting. Back in Montana, her reputation had eventually led to unwanted pressure and expectations that interfered with the meditative quality she found in precision work. At range 7, designated for 500-yard precision shooting, Rachel set up her equipment with the same methodical care she'd shown at the shorter distance. The target appeared impossibly small through her scope, requiring adjustments for bullet drop and wind drift that separated advanced marksmen from casual shooters. Around her, the Academy's most serious practitioners continued their own training, though several had positioned themselves to observe her performance at this more challenging distance. Rachel understood that her 300-yard shooting had been impressive enough to generate curiosity, but 500 yards would provide a more definitive test of her actual capabilities. She chambered her first round, settled into position, and prepared to demonstrate that her earlier performance hadn't been the extent of her abilities. Chapter 5. Suspicion. Rachel's performance at 500 yards created the kind of problem that institutions like the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy weren't equipped to handle. Her first 10 shots produced a grouping that measured exactly 1.2 inches, a level of precision that even the Academy's instructors achieved only on exceptional days. By the end of her first session at the advanced range, word had spread throughout the facility about the unassuming young woman who was quietly out-shooting veteran marksmen. The reaction wasn't celebration, it was suspicion. Master Sergeant Williams, the Academy's senior instructor, and a man whose authority was rarely questioned, arrived at Range 7 during Rachel's second day of practice. He observed her shooting through high-powered spotting scopes, took detailed notes on her technique, and engaged her in increasingly probing conversations about her background. "Miss Winters," Williams said during a break between shot strings, "I've been reviewing your registration information. You listed recreational shooting as your primary experience. That seems modest given what we're observing." Rachel continued cleaning her rifle while responding. "I prefer to let my shooting speak for itself, rather than making claims about my abilities. The thing is," Williams continued, his tone carrying subtle pressure, "we have liability concerns when shooters significantly exceed their stated experience levels. It suggests either misrepresentation on the application or skills acquired through channels we should probably know about." The implication was clear. Rachel's abilities didn't match her paperwork, and that discrepancy was being treated as a potential problem rather than a pleasant surprise. Williams's questions became increasingly specific, focusing on her training history, her father's military service, and the exact nature of her shooting experience in Montana. The inquiry felt less like professional interest and more like a security investigation. Other instructors began finding reasons to interrupt Rachel's practice sessions. Captain Martinez arrived with routine safety inspections that seemed targeted specifically at Rachel's equipment and technique. Range Officer Hutchinson implemented enhanced supervision protocols that required Rachel to explain her shot placement and technique decisions after each string of fire. The scrutiny extended beyond official oversight. Rachel noticed that her target selections were being questioned more frequently, her equipment was being examined more thoroughly, and her shooting position was being observed more closely than other shooters at similar skill levels. What should have been recognition of exceptional ability was being treated as a potential security concern. The situation escalated when Colonel James Harrison, the Academy's commanding officer, requested a private meeting with Rachel in his office. Harrison was a career military officer whose reputation for maintaining institutional standards was absolute. His office walls were covered with commendations from various special operations units, and his desk displayed photos with some of the most elite marksmen in American military history. "Miss Winters." Harrison began, his tone professionally courteous but unmistakably authoritative. "Your shooting has been quite impressive. However, we've had some concerns raised about the level of skill you're demonstrating relative to your stated background." Rachel sat quietly, recognizing the formal tone that often preceded institutional pushback against anything that didn't fit established categories. "Our instructors report that your technique suggests training well beyond recreational shooting," Harrison continued. "Given your age and the level of precision you're achieving, we need to better understand the source of your capabilities." The questions that followed were invasive and accusatory. Had she received military training? Was she affiliated with any government agencies? Had she misrepresented her background to gain access to American shooting facilities? Each question carried the implication that her skills were somehow suspect rather than admirable. Rachel answered honestly, but found her responses being analyzed for inconsistencies or hidden meanings. Her father's military service was scrutinized as potential evidence of covert training. Her student status was questioned as possibly providing cover for other activities. Her preference for practicing alone was interpreted as secretive behavior rather than personal choice. The most frustrating aspect was that her shooting ability, which should have been viewed as an asset, was being treated as evidence of deception. Harrison's questions suggested that he couldn't conceive of someone developing elite-level skills through dedication and proper training alone. There had to be some institutional explanation, some formal program, or official backing that justified her capabilities. As Rachel answered yet another probing question about her father's military connections, her eyes drifted to a folder on Harrison's desk. Though mostly covered by other papers, she could see the edge of what appeared to be an FBI file. The visible portion showed her name and what looked like application documentation. Information she'd submitted months earlier when applying for a specialized FBI training program that had subsequently rejected her without explanation. Harrison noticed her glance and casually moved a folder to cover the visible edge. His expression remained neutral, but Rachel sensed that there was more to this interrogation than simple concern about her shooting abilities. Something in her background had triggered deeper scrutiny than she'd anticipated. "Miss Winters," Harrison concluded, "we're going to need you to limit your practice to basic ranges until we can verify your background more thoroughly. The advanced ranges are reserved for shooters with documented training credentials." Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. She was being punished for excellence excluded from opportunities because her abilities exceeded what others believed possible for someone with her background. The Academy's response to her skills wasn't celebration or curiosity about how she achieved them. It was institutional fear of anything that didn't fit their predetermined categories. "Sir," Rachel said quietly, "I've never misrepresented myself or my background. I've answered every question honestly. My shooting speaks for itself." "That's exactly the problem," Harrison replied. "Your shooting raises questions that your background doesn't answer. Until we can resolve those questions, I need you to stay within appropriate parameters." Rachel left the meeting feeling like she'd been convicted of a crime she didn't understand. Her dedication to developing exceptional skills was being treated as evidence of deception. Her quiet competence was being interpreted as suspicious secrecy. The very abilities that should have earned her respect and opportunities were instead being used to justify her exclusion from the advanced training she'd come to the academy to pursue. That evening, Rachel sat in her apartment staring at her practice logs and equipment manuals. For the first time since arriving in Virginia, she wondered if pursuing her shooting passion had been a mistake. The academy represented the pinnacle of precision shooting training. But if excellence was treated as a threat, rather than an achievement, perhaps there was no place for someone like her in their rigid institutional structure. She thought about her father's advice. True marksmanship isn't about impressing others. It's about perfect execution when it matters most. Maybe it was time to stop trying to prove herself and start looking for opportunities where her skills would be valued rather than feared. As Rachel packed away her equipment, her phone rang with a Montana area code she recognized immediately. Her father calling for their weekly check-in. She hesitated before answering, unsure whether to burden him with her frustrations. William's recovery remained fragile, and she was careful not to add stress to his life. "Hey, Dad?" she answered, forcing lightness into her voice. "Rachel!" William's voice came through, still carrying the slight tension that had become part of him after his final deployment. "How's the shooting at that fancy Virginia academy you found?" Rachel paused, considering her response. "It's complicated. My shooting is good, but they seem more concerned about where I learned than how well I perform." William's soft chuckle carried understanding, born of similar experiences. "The old guard doesn't know what to do with talent that doesn't come through their approved channels. Your grandfather faced the same thing when he came back from Korea. Sometimes the best shooters aren't the ones with the most patches on their sleeves." His words carried the weight of family history Rachel had only partially understood. Her grandfather, James Winters, had been a Marine sniper in Korea, whose innovations in fieldcraft had initially been rejected by military hierarchy before eventually being adopted as standard procedure. The Winters family had a long tradition of excellence that existed outside official recognition. "Just remember why you shoot Rachel," William continued. "It's not about their approval. It's about the perfect marriage of skill and execution. The rest is just noise." After the call ended, Rachel opened her notebook to a blank page and began planning alternative practice locations. The academy might have restricted her access, but they couldn't stop her from continuing to develop her skills. She would find other venues, other approaches, other ways to pursue excellence without institutional validation. What Rachel couldn't know was that 3 weeks later, the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy would receive a request that would test every assumption they'd made about capability preparation and who deserved access to elite training opportunities. The Girl, the Legend, and the Barrett, 50 cal. At Part 2, Opportunity and Challenge. Chapter 6. The Special Request. 3 weeks after Rachel's restriction to basic ranges, the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy received an unusual request that would test every assumption they'd made about capability preparation and who deserved access to elite training opportunities. The call came directly to Colonel Harrison's office from Admiral Patricia Blackwell, commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. Her message was brief and urgent. Navy SEAL Team 6 required immediate access to a precision shooting facility for evaluation of new long-range engagement protocols. They needed a venue with targets extending to 200 yards and expert civilian instructors who could provide unbiased assessment of their techniques. "We've heard exceptional things about your academy," Admiral Blackwell explained during the secure phone call, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to commanding elite warriors. "Our team is developing new counter-sniper protocols for urban environments, and we need civilian expertise to validate our approaches. This isn't about training our people. It's about testing methodologies that could save lives in active combat zones." Harrison felt both pride and pressure as he confirmed the Academy's capability to support such a high-level evaluation. Naval Special Warfare units rarely sought civilian validation of their techniques, but when they did, it represented an enormous opportunity for institutional recognition and future contracts. The SEAL team would arrive in 72 hours, led by Commander Howard Mason, a legendary sniper whose reputation extended throughout the special operations community. Mason's background included multiple combat deployments, several precision shooting records, and development of advanced training protocols that were now standard throughout naval special warfare. His name was spoken with reverence in shooting circles, the man who had made a confirmed kill at 875 yards during a sandstorm in Iraq, saving an entire Marine platoon caught in an ambush. Harrison immediately began coordinating the Academy's response. He assigned his best instructors to support roles, cleared the advanced ranges for exclusive SEAL use, and prepared evaluation materials that would demonstrate the Academy's capabilities to the most elite shooters in the American military. The one problem was the test itself. Mason's team needed to validate their techniques against an unknown variable, a shooter whose abilities they couldn't predict or prepare for. They required someone skilled enough to challenge their protocols, but not affiliated with military training systems that might bias the evaluation. "We need a precision shooter who can provide genuine challenge without prior knowledge of our methods," Mason explained during his pre-arrival briefing call, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who weighed each word carefully. "Someone skilled enough to expose weaknesses in our approach, but not trained in military counter-sniper doctrine." Harrison reviewed his options with growing concern. The Academy's instructors were all former military, making them poor choices for unbiased evaluation. The advanced students were either active law enforcement or competitive shooters, whose techniques might be too familiar to the SEALs. Master Sergeant Williams suggested inviting top competitive shooters from other facilities, but Mason rejected that approach. Competition shooters are trained for known distances and controlled conditions. We need someone who can adapt to unknown variables and maintain precision under unexpected circumstances. Harrison found himself facing an impossible requirement. Identify a civilian shooter skilled enough to challenge Navy SEALs, but unfamiliar enough with military doctrine to provide valid testing parameters. Such individuals simply didn't exist within the Academy's normal networks. That's when Captain Martinez made a suggestion that changed everything. "Sir," she said during a staff meeting, the hesitation in her voice suggesting she knew how her words would be received. "What about the young woman we've been monitoring? Rachel Winters. Her shooting is easily at the level you're describing, and she has zero exposure to American military protocols." The suggestion created uncomfortable silence in the room. Rachel had been restricted to basic ranges precisely because her abilities exceeded her documented background. Now they were considering her for an assignment that their most advanced instructors might struggle with. "She's been flagged as a security concern," Williams objected, his voice carrying the authority of the Academy's senior instructor. "We don't even know how she developed those skills." "But that's exactly what makes her perfect for this evaluation," Martinez pressed, leaning forward in her chair. "Her techniques are completely independent of American training doctrine. She could provide exactly the kind of unknown variable Mason needs." Harrison found himself caught between institutional caution and operational necessity. Rachel's restricted status reflected concerns about her background, but those same concerns might make her ideal for an evaluation requiring independence from American military training systems. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same abilities that had made Rachel seem threatening as a student might make her invaluable as an evaluator. Her skills, which had been treated as suspicious when she sought training opportunities, could now serve a critical national security function. "What's her current status?" Harrison asked, his expression giving nothing away. "Still restricted to basic ranges," Williams replied. "She's been coming in regularly, but we've limited her to 300-yard targets and standard precision exercises." Harrison made a decision that would prove the Academy had been fundamentally wrong about Rachel Winters from the very beginning. "Bring her in for a capabilities assessment," he ordered, his tone making it clear the matter was decided. "If she can perform at the level Mason needs, we'll authorize her participation in the evaluation, but I want complete documentation of her abilities before we make any commitments." As the staff meeting dispersed, Harrison remained at the conference table, staring at the folder containing Rachel's application and background check. Something about this situation felt wrong. The Academy's most promising shooter had been sidelined based on suspicions that now seemed increasingly misplaced. Yet there was still the matter of her FBI application rejection, a red flag that couldn't be ignored. Harrison opened the folder and reviewed the security notes again. Rachel had applied to the FBI's Specialized Firearms Program 6 months earlier, a competitive training opportunity for civilians with exceptional marksmanship skills. Her application had progressed through initial screening before being rejected with the cryptic notation, "Background check revealed disqualifying incident. Subject deemed security risk. Application denied." No details of the incident were provided, and Harrison's attempts to gain clarification from his FBI contacts had been met with bureaucratic stonewalling. Whatever had disqualified Rachel remained classified, a black mark with no explanation which had heavily influenced the Academy's decision to restrict her access. Now faced with the need to impress Commander Mason, and Admiral Blackwell Harrison was considering ignoring that warning. The decision weighed heavily as he stared at the phone, knowing the call he was about to make could either secure the Academy's future or compromise its security protocols. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up the receiver and dialed Rachel's number. Chapter 7. Assessment. The Capabilities Assessment took place on a gray Thursday morning, under conditions that Colonel Harrison hoped would provide definitive answers about Rachel Winters's abilities. He'd assembled the Academy's most experienced evaluators and designed a test that would push even elite marksmen to their limits. If Rachel was going to participate in the Navy SEAL evaluation, Harrison needed absolute confidence in her skills. Range 12 stretched to 1,000 yards across terrain that included elevation changes, wind patterns, and target configurations designed to challenge the most advanced precision shooters. Harrison had personally selected the test parameters 10 shots at each of 4 distances, with scoring based on both accuracy and consistency under time pressure. Rachel arrived at the designated time carrying her familiar rifle case and wearing the same practical clothing that had marked her as an outsider during her first visit. She showed no signs of nervousness, despite knowing that her performance would determine whether she remained relegated to basic ranges or gained access to opportunities she'd been denied for weeks. Master Sergeant Williams conducted the briefing with professional thoroughness, explaining target configurations, timing requirements, and evaluation criteria. Rachel listened carefully, taking minimal notes, and asked only technical questions about wind conditions and target specifications. The test begins at 600 yards. Williams explained, his tone neutral, but his eyes assessing Rachel's every reaction. You'll have 90 seconds per shot string with targets that require sub-MOA accuracy to achieve passing scores. Most competitive shooters require multiple attempts to meet these standards. Rachel nodded and began setting up her equipment with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. Around the observation area, Academy instructors and advanced students gathered to witness an evaluation that had generated considerable speculation throughout the facility. Captain Martinez positioned herself at the spotting scope station, responsible for documenting shot placement and measuring group sizes. She'd been advocating for Rachel's inclusion in the SEAL evaluation, but she also understood that substandard performance would vindicate those who viewed Rachel as an overrated security risk. The first shot string at 600 yards established immediate credibility. Rachel's 10 shots produced a group measuring 0.7 inches well within the sub-MOA requirement and achieved with steady consistency that impressed even skeptical observers. Her shooting position was textbook perfect, her timing consistent, and her focus absolute. At 700 yards, wind conditions became a significant factor, requiring constant adjustment for drift patterns that changed between shots. Rachel adapted seamlessly, reading wind indicators and making corrections that resulted in another sub-MOA group. Her shooting demonstrated not just accuracy, but the ability to process environmental variables in real time. The 800-yard test pushed into territory where only the most skilled marksmen maintained consistent precision. Rachel's group opened slightly to 0.9 inches, still well within evaluation standards, but requiring every bit of her technical knowledge and 4 years of disciplined practice. At 900 yards, the evaluation entered elite territory. Most competitive shooters struggled to maintain precision at this distance, and even experienced military marksmen often required multiple attempts to achieve consistent accuracy. The targets appeared impossibly small. Through the spotting scopes and environmental factors magnified every technical imperfection. Rachel's first shot struck dead center, drawing murmurs of appreciation from the observing instructors. Her second shot opened the group by half an inch, still exceptional, but showing the first signs that she was approaching the limits of her equipment and conditions. By the 10th shot, her group measured 1.1 inches, technically exceeding MOA standards, but representing shooting that would challenge most professionals. Colonel Harrison studied the results with growing amazement. Rachel had not only met every evaluation standard, but had done so with consistency that suggested she was operating well within her capabilities. More importantly, she demonstrated adaptability and composure under the kind of pressure that separated genuine marksmen from recreational shooters. However, Harrison's satisfaction was tempered by a disturbing realization. If Rachel could perform at this level, why was the Academy struggling to identify other civilian shooters capable of challenging Navy SEALs? The evaluation had revealed that their most advanced students and experienced instructors might not be able to match Rachel's performance under similar conditions. Master Sergeant Williams privately admitted to Harrison that Rachel's shooting exceeded his own capabilities at longer distances. Captain Martinez acknowledged that Rachel's consistency surpassed most competitive shooters she'd observed. Even the Academy's guest instructors, including former military snipers with combat experience, expressed respect for technique that clearly represented years of serious development. The uncomfortable truth was becoming clear: the Academy had been treating its most skilled practitioner as a security threat while struggling to identify anyone else capable of providing the challenge that Navy SEALs required. Rachel's abilities weren't suspicious. They were simply better than anyone wanted to acknowledge. "Sir," Captain Martinez said during the post-evaluation briefing, "I recommend immediate authorization for Miss Winters's participation in the SEAL evaluation. Her skills clearly meet mission requirements, and her background provides exactly the independence Commander Mason requested." Harrison nodded, though he was already calculating the institutional embarrassment of admitting they'd been wrong about Rachel's capabilities and value to the Academy. The irony was perfect. The woman they'd been excluding for exceptional abilities was now their best option for supporting one of the most important evaluations in the Academy's history. Rachel received the call at 1847 hours on Friday evening, just as she was reviewing ballistics tables for the following week's restricted practice sessions. Captain Martinez's voice carried an unusual combination of formality and anticipation that immediately captured Rachel's attention. "Miss Winters, this is Captain Martinez from the Academy. Colonel Harrison would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 0800 to discuss a training opportunity. Please bring your equipment and be prepared for potential range work." The invitation surprised Rachel for several reasons. She hadn't been invited to Harrison's office since the uncomfortable meeting that had resulted in her restriction to basic ranges. More intriguingly, Martinez had mentioned training opportunity rather than another round of questioning about her background and capabilities. Rachel spent Friday evening preparing equipment and reviewing the evaluation she'd completed earlier that week. Her performance had clearly impressed the Academy staff, but she'd learned not to assume that competent shooting would automatically translate into recognition or opportunity. The Academy's institutional culture seemed more comfortable with exclusion than inclusion when faced with unexpected excellence. Saturday morning brought unusually clear mountain weather. As Rachel drove to the Academy, she arrived early and used the extra time to observe the facility's activity patterns. Several unmarked vehicles were parked near the administrative building, and she noticed increased security presence around the advanced ranges. Something significant was clearly planned for the weekend. Colonel Harrison's office felt different during Rachel's second visit. The atmosphere was professional rather than investigative, and Harrison's demeanor suggested opportunity rather than scrutiny. Captain Martinez was also present, along with Master Sergeant Williams, creating a formal briefing environment rather than an interrogation setting. "Miss Winters," Harrison began, "your evaluation results this week were exceptional. Your shooting demonstrates skills that meet some very specific requirements we've recently encountered." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "We've been contacted by Naval Special Warfare requesting civilian support for an advanced training evaluation. They need precision shooters who can provide genuine challenge without prior exposure to American military protocols." Rachel listened carefully, recognizing that this conversation represented a fundamental shift in how the Academy viewed her capabilities. The same skills that had been treated as suspicious were now being presented as valuable assets. The evaluation involves testing new counter-sniper protocols under realistic conditions, Martinez continued. They need shooters capable of engaging targets at extended ranges while adapting to unknown variables. Your background provides exactly the independence they're looking for. Rachel felt a surge of excitement that she carefully controlled. This was the kind of challenging application she'd been hoping to find when she'd first approached the academy. More importantly, it represented validation that her years of disciplined preparation had developed capabilities that could serve purposes beyond personal satisfaction. "What would my role involve?" Rachel asked, keeping her tone neutral despite the opportunity being presented. "You'd be participating in scenarios designed to test SEAL counter-sniper techniques." Williams explained his previous skepticism, apparently set aside. "They need opposition that can provide realistic challenge while maintaining safety protocols. Your shooting would help evaluate the effectiveness of their new approaches." Rachel understood immediately that this opportunity represented far more than a chance to use her skills. Success in supporting Navy SEAL training would provide the kind of credibility that could transform her relationship with the Academy and open doors to advanced training she'd been denied. More importantly, it would prove that her unconventional background was an asset rather than a limitation. However, Rachel also recognized the risks involved. If she performed poorly or failed to meet SEAL standards, it would vindicate those who'd questioned her abilities and potentially end her access to the Academy entirely. The evaluation would be conducted under conditions far more challenging than anything she'd experienced against professionals whose expertise was legendary. "When would this take place?" she asked. "Monday morning," Harrison replied. "The team arrives Sunday evening for equipment preparation and briefings. You'd need to be available for the full evaluation period, potentially extending through Wednesday, depending on scenario requirements." Rachel considered the implications carefully. Her university schedule could accommodate the absence, but more importantly, she felt ready for this level of challenge. Her father's training had emphasized preparation for unknown variables, and her own practice had focused on adaptability rather than repetitive precision under controlled conditions. "I'd be honored to participate," Rachel said. Harrison nodded with visible relief. Rachel realized that the Academy had been struggling to identify suitable candidates for this evaluation, and her acceptance solved a significant problem for their institutional reputation. "Miss Winters," Martinez added, "I should mention that the team leader is Commander Howard Mason. His reputation in precision shooting is exceptional, and his standards are extremely high. This won't be a casual demonstration." Rachel smiled slightly. "Captain, I've been preparing for opportunities like this for 4 years. I understand the standards involved." As the briefing concluded, Rachel felt the same calm focus that always preceded her most important shooting sessions. The Academy had finally recognized that her capabilities were an asset rather than a threat. Now she had the chance to prove that unconventional preparation could meet any challenge that conventional training could present. Walking back to her car, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Months of dismissal and restriction had led to an opportunity that validated everything she'd been working toward. The same independence that had made her seem suspicious would now serve a critical training function. She had 2 days to prepare for the most important shooting evaluation of her life. Knowing that success would change everything about how the Academy viewed both her abilities and her value to their mission. Chapter 8. Meeting the SEALs. Monday morning arrived with crystalline mountain air and conditions that Commander Howard Mason immediately recognized as perfect for precision shooting evaluation. Rachel arrived at the Academy an hour early, using the extra time to familiarize herself with the extended ranges and equipment configurations that would define the day's challenges. Mason's team had transformed the Academy overnight. Advanced spotting equipment, electronic target systems, and ballistic measurement devices created a technological environment that rivaled military training facilities. Rachel watched the SEALs prepare their evaluation protocols with a methodical precision that had made them legendary among special operations units. The team moved with the quiet efficiency of men who had perfected their skills under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Their conversations were minimal, focused entirely on technical parameters and operational considerations. There was none of the bravado or posturing that often characterized military units in civilian settings, just the calm competence of professionals preparing for serious work. Commander Mason himself was exactly what Rachel had expected: compact, intensely focused, and carrying the quiet confidence that came from years of life-or-death precision work. His weathered face and calculating eyes spoke of experiences that most civilians couldn't imagine. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw hinted at close encounters that his skill had allowed him to survive. When he approached Rachel's preparation area, his assessment was immediate and thorough, cataloging her equipment, posture, and demeanor with professional interest. "You must be Winters," Mason said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who understood his own strength and had nothing to prove. "Martinez tells me you've been impressing people around here with some exceptional shooting." "I try to maintain consistent standards," Rachel replied, recognizing that Mason's casual tone masked serious evaluation of her potential as a training partner. "We'll see about that," Mason said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Today's scenarios are designed to test adaptive precision under unknown conditions. We're not looking for target practice. We're evaluating combat-applicable skills under realistic pressure." Rachel nodded, understanding that this wasn't about showing off or competing. It was about providing genuine value to a training process that could ultimately save lives in combat situations. The responsibility was significant, but it was exactly the kind of purpose she'd been seeking in her shooting practice. Mason introduced his team briefly, 8 men whose names were offered, but whose backgrounds remained unspecified. Rachel noticed that they all observed her with the same measured assessment their commander had demonstrated: professional rather than personal, evaluating capability rather than appearance. Among them stood a slightly taller man with close-cropped dark hair and intense blue eyes. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar to Rachel, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. The name tag on his tactical vest read Reynolds, a common enough name that triggered no specific memory. The first scenario placed Rachel at an observation position 800 yards from multiple target areas scattered across terrain that simulated urban environments. Mason's team would attempt to neutralize simulated threats, while Rachel provided opposition shooting designed to test their counter-sniper protocols. "Your job," Mason explained, "is to engage targets that represent threats our team needs to identify and neutralize. We need shooting good enough to expose weaknesses in our approach, but safe enough to maintain training standards." Rachel understood immediately that this was far more complex than simple marksmanship evaluation. She needed to think tactically, adapting her shooting to provide realistic challenge while working within safety protocols that protected everyone involved. The scenario began with Mason's team attempting to clear a simulated building complex, while Rachel engaged targets that represented covering positions for hostile forces. Her shooting needed to be accurate enough to eliminate threats before Mason's team could neutralize them, creating realistic pressure for the SEAL protocols. Rachel's first engagement came at a 650-yard target that required shooting through a narrow window opening. She made the shot cleanly, drawing immediate attention from Mason's spotters, who were tracking all engagement results. Her second target at 720 yards required compensation for wind drift across uneven terrain. Another clean hit. As the scenario progressed, Rachel found herself operating at levels of tactical complexity she'd never experienced. Rather than simple precision shooting, she was thinking like a sniper, selecting targets based on strategic value and adapting her shooting to support scenario objectives. "Opposition shooter is performing above scenario parameters." Mason's voice crackled through the communication system, adjusting team protocols to accommodate enhanced threat level. Rachel felt a surge of satisfaction at Mason's recognition that her shooting was exceeding evaluation expectations. More importantly, she was providing exactly the kind of realistic challenge that would help validate or refine the SEAL training protocols. During a brief pause in the scenario, Rachel noticed the tall SEAL Reynolds watching her through binoculars. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity to his observation that went beyond professional assessment. When he realized she had noticed his attention, he quickly turned away, rejoining his team for a tactical discussion. The second scenario moved to 1,000-yard engagements across terrain that included elevation changes and complex wind patterns. Rachel found herself shooting at targets that appeared and disappeared within seconds, requiring rapid target acquisition and immediate precision that tested every skill she'd developed. Her shooting was flawless. Target after target felt precise shots that impressed even Mason's experienced team. More importantly, her performance was forcing the SEALs to adapt their protocols in real time, proving that their training scenarios were providing genuine value. During a break between scenarios, Mason approached Rachel with an expression that combined respect and curiosity. "Winters," he said, "your shooting is exceptional. Where exactly did you develop these skills?" Rachel provided her standard response about training with her father in Montana. But Mason's follow-up questions revealed that he understood precision shooting at levels far beyond casual interest. His questions were specific, technical, and designed to assess not just her abilities, but the depth of knowledge that supported them. "Your father taught you well," Mason concluded. But this level of precision under tactical conditions suggests training that goes beyond recreational shooting. Rachel offered no elaboration, maintaining the same quiet competence that had characterized her approach since arriving at the academy. Mason studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slightly as if confirming something to himself. As Mason walked away, Rachel noticed Reynolds approaching. The tall SEAL moved with the controlled grace of someone who had mastered his physical capabilities, his eyes never leaving Rachel's face. "Miss Winters?" he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Your shooting is impressive. Mind if I ask where in Montana you're from?" "Missoula," Rachel replied, watching his reaction carefully. "My father has a place outside town." Reynolds nodded, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Your father, he was Special Forces, right? Would I know him?" The question seemed casual, but Rachel sensed an underlying purpose that made her cautious. "William Winters. He retired about 4 years ago, mostly kept to himself." Something flickered in Reynolds's eyes. Recognition, or perhaps something deeper. "William Winters," he repeated as if testing the name. "The name sounds familiar. I'll have to think about where I might have heard it." Before Rachel could respond, Mason called Reynolds back to the team, ending the conversation. As Reynolds walked away, Rachel felt certain there was more to his questions than casual interest. The SEAL knew something about her father, or thought he did, but was being careful not to reveal too much. The third scenario was Mason's ultimate test. Unknown distance engagements at targets ranging from 600 to 200 yards, with Rachel required to estimate ranges, calculate ballistic solutions, and deliver first-round hits under time pressure that simulated combat conditions. Rachel's performance was perfect. Every estimate was accurate, every calculation correct, every shot precisely placed. Mason's team found themselves facing opposition that matched or exceeded their own capabilities, providing exactly the kind of realistic challenge they needed to validate their training protocols. As the evaluation concluded, Mason gathered his team for immediate debrief, while Rachel cleaned her equipment. She could hear fragments of their discussion that suggested her shooting had not only met their requirements, but had exceeded expectations in ways that would influence their final training recommendations. Mason approached her again as she prepared to leave, his expression thoughtful. "Winters," he said, "that was some of the finest precision shooting I've witnessed outside active combat zones. Your performance today validated training protocols that could save lives in operational environments. Rachel felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. Her shooting had served a purpose larger than individual recognition, contributing to training that would enhance the capabilities of America's most elite military units. As she packed her rifle, Rachel noticed Reynolds speaking quietly with Mason, both men occasionally glancing in her direction. Their conversation appeared intense, with Reynolds seeming to press a point that Mason was reluctant to accept. Eventually, Mason nodded, and Reynolds walked quickly away, disappearing into one of the facility buildings. The exchange left Rachel unsettled. Something about this evaluation had triggered recognition or connections she hadn't anticipated, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Reynolds knew more about her or her father than he was willing to share. Later that evening, as Rachel reviewed her performance data in preparation for the next day's scenarios, her phone rang. The number was blocked, but something told her to answer rather than let it go to voicemail. "Rachel Winters," she answered. "Miss Winters, this is Jake Reynolds from today's evaluation." The SEAL's voice was low and measured, as if concerned about being overheard. "I apologize for the unusual contact, but there's something I think you should know before tomorrow's session." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. "I'm listening." "Your father, William Winters, he saved my life in Afghanistan in 2011. Our unit was pinned down during an operation that officially never happened. We were out of communication, surrounded by hostile forces with no extraction plan. Your father made 3 impossible shots at over 200 yards in high wind conditions. Those shots created the window that allowed my team to reach safety." The revelation struck Rachel with physical force. Her father had never discussed specific operations, maintaining the code of silence that defined Special Forces operators. But she'd sometimes caught him staring at photos of men whose names he never mentioned, his expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Why are you telling me this?" Rachel asked, her voice steady, despite the emotional impact of Reynolds's words. "Because that Barrett .50 caliber rifle that Commander Mason carries, the one he's so proud of, it belonged to your father. It was presumed lost during that operation. I recognized some of the custom modifications when I saw it up close today, and then I recognized your shooting technique. It's distinctive, something about the breathing pattern and trigger control that your father perfected." Rachel struggled to process this information. Her father had mentioned losing his favorite rifle during a mission, but had never elaborated on the circumstances. That it had somehow ended up in Mason's possession raised questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "Does Mason know?" she asked. "No," Reynolds replied. "At least I don't think so. The rifle came to him through unofficial channels after the operation. The paperwork listed it as battlefield recovery unassigned. I never made the connection until I saw you shoot today." "What does this mean for tomorrow's evaluation?" Reynolds hesitated. "Mason has something special planned, a final test involving his Barrett. I thought you should know the history before you're handed that weapon. It would have meant something to your father." After the call ended, Rachel sat motionless, absorbing the implications of what she'd learned. Tomorrow, she would be asked to shoot a weapon that had once belonged to her father, a rifle with a history connected to classified operations and lives saved under circumstances that officially never occurred. The coincidence seemed too perfect to be random, yet she couldn't imagine how Mason or the Academy could have orchestrated such a connection. Whatever tomorrow's test involved, it had just acquired a significance that went far beyond professional evaluation. Chapter 9. Escalating Challenges. Tuesday morning brought the evaluation that would define Rachel's relationship with both the Academy and her own understanding of her capabilities. Commander Mason had designed a final scenario that pushed beyond standard training protocols into territory that tested not just shooting skills, but decision-making under extreme pressure. "Today's challenge simulates conditions our teams face in hostile environments," Mason explained during the pre-dawn briefing, his voice grave. Unknown distances, time pressure, environmental factors, and target priorities that change in real time. This isn't about perfect shooting. It's about effective shooting when everything else is imperfect. The scenario placed Rachel at a position 900 yards from a complex target array that included moving elements, partially concealed positions, and targets that appeared for limited time windows. Mason's team would attempt to complete objectives while Rachel provided opposition that simulated enemy sniper activity under combat conditions. Rachel understood immediately that this scenario operated at levels of complexity that separated recreational shooting from life-or-death precision work. Success required not just accuracy, but tactical thinking, rapid decision-making, and the ability to maintain precision while processing multiple variables simultaneously. The evaluation began with Mason's team advancing through terrain, while Rachel engaged targets designed to represent covering positions for hostile forces. Her first shot needed to neutralize a target at an estimated 820 yards that was visible for only 8 seconds. She made the shot with 2 seconds remaining, drawing immediate recognition from Mason's spotter. As the scenario progressed, Rachel found herself operating in conditions that pushed her skills to absolute limits. Targets appeared at ranges she needed to estimate instantly, requiring ballistic calculations performed under time pressure that left no margin for error. Wind conditions changed constantly, forcing continuous adjustments to her shooting solutions. The most challenging moment came when Mason's team called for immediate suppression of a target at unknown distance that was threatening their advance. Rachel had 15 seconds to estimate range, calculate ballistic solution, and deliver a shot that would allow the SEAL team to continue their mission. Through her scope, the target appeared impossibly small and distant. Rachel's training kicked in. Range estimation based on target size and environmental reference points. Ballistic calculation accounting for elevation and wind. Natural respiratory pause, smooth trigger control, and immediate follow-up assessment. Her shot struck the target dead center at what post-scenario measurement revealed to be 147 yards. The SEALs froze momentarily, clearly not expecting such precise execution under extreme pressure. "Outstanding shot, Winters!" Mason's voice crackled through the communication system with genuine admiration. "That's combat-level precision under operational pressure." Throughout the morning, Rachel noticed Reynolds watching her performance with particular intensity. The tall SEAL's expression revealed nothing, but his constant observation suggested he was looking for confirmation of connections he'd already begun to make. During the midday break, Colonel Harrison arrived to observe the final portion of the evaluation. His presence signaled the institutional importance the Academy was placing on Mason's assessment. Harrison spoke briefly with Mason, both men occasionally glancing toward Rachel as she maintained her equipment. Captain Martinez approached Rachel's position carrying a thermos of coffee and an energy bar. "How are you holding up?" she asked, offering the refreshments. "Good," Rachel replied. "The scenarios are challenging, but that's the point." Martinez nodded, glancing toward Mason and Harrison. "You've made quite an impression." Mason doesn't typically praise civilian shooters, especially not during active scenarios. Rachel accepted the coffee but said nothing, maintaining the quiet focus that had defined her approach to shooting since her father's first lessons. She knew that today's final test would involve Mason's Barrett, the rifle that Reynolds claimed had once belonged to her father. The connection created emotional complications she hadn't anticipated, but she was determined not to let them affect her performance. When the evaluation resumed, Mason gathered everyone for the announcement of the final challenge. The SEALs formed a semicircle, their expressions revealing the significance they attached to what was about to occur. Harrison and the Academy staff positioned themselves where they could observe both Rachel and the targets. Final evaluation phase involves precision engagement under conditions of maximum uncertainty. Mason announced, his voice carrying across the range. Opposition shooter will be required to neutralize a target at extreme range using unfamiliar equipment with minimal preparation time. Mason turned to one of his team members who approached carrying a long case made of black ballistic nylon. The SEAL placed the case on a table and stepped back, his movements reverent. "This is my personal Barrett M82A1 50 caliber rifle," Mason said, opening the case to reveal the massive weapon nestled in custom-cut foam. "It's been with me through 3 combat deployments and has neutralized 37 confirmed threats at distances exceeding 1,500 yards. The Barrett gleamed in the afternoon sun, its massive frame designed not for elegance, but for lethal efficiency, at ranges that exceeded the capabilities of standard sniper rifles. The scope alone cost more than most civilian rifles, and the custom modification spoke of years of refinement based on field experience. Miss Winters will attempt to engage a target at 1,200 yards using this weapon she has never fired before," Mason continued. "One-shot unknown wind conditions with 3 minutes of preparation time. This will test the ability to adapt technique to unfamiliar equipment under time pressure, a critical skill in operational environments." Rachel approached the table aware that every eye was focused on her reaction. The Barrett represented the pinnacle of long-range precision weapons, a rifle designed specifically for military applications beyond the reach of conventional firearms. For Mason to offer his personal weapon for a civilian to fire was unprecedented. As she looked down at the rifle, Rachel noticed details that confirmed Reynolds's claim. Near the receiver, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a small engraved WW, followed by 3 stars, her father's personal marking that he placed on all his custom weapons. The worn grip showed patterns of use that matched her father's hand position, slightly different from standard technique, due to an old injury to his index finger. This wasn't just a rifle that had once belonged to her father, it was his custom. Barrett modified to his exact specifications and carrying the marks of his years of use. Rachel felt a surge of emotion that she carefully contained, focusing instead on the technical requirements of the challenge ahead. Mason watched her closely, his expression revealing nothing about whether he knew the rifle's true history. "Whenever you're ready, Winters. The target is the red diamond at the base of the ridge. Wind is variable 5 to 12 miles per hour from multiple directions. You have 3 minutes to prepare and 1 shot to execute." Rachel lifted the Barrett from its case, feeling its substantial weight and balance. Though she had never fired this specific rifle, her father had trained her on a similar model years earlier. The fundamentals were the same, though the exact characteristics would differ based on the custom modifications. She positioned herself behind the rifle, establishing a stable shooting platform and analyzing the rifle's setup. The scope was zeroed differently than she would have set it, requiring mental calculations to adjust her aim. The trigger pull was lighter than standard, exactly how her father preferred it, requiring subtle adjustments to her technique. Reynolds stood to one side, his expression unreadable as Rachel prepared for the shot. The connection between them, the shared knowledge of the rifle's history, remained unspoken but present in every glance. Through the scope, Rachel could see the target at the base of the distant ridge, a small red diamond that appeared little larger than a postage stamp at this extreme distance. Between her position and the target, heat waves rose from the valley floor, creating mirage effects that distorted the image and complicated range estimation. She analyzed the environmental conditions methodically. The primary wind was from the southwest at approximately 8 miles per hour, but secondary currents in the valley created variable effects that would influence the bullet's path. The elevation difference between her position and the target required additional compensation for ballistic drop over the extreme distance. In the final seconds of her preparation time, Rachel found herself thinking of her father. If Reynolds was right, William Winters had used this exact rifle to save lives in a combat situation that officially never happened. The Barrett carried a history that connected her to her father's legacy, in ways she had never anticipated. "Time," Mason announced. "Whenever you're ready for your shot." Rachel settled into her final position, finding the natural point of aim and establishing her breathing rhythm. The massive rifle seemed to become an extension of her body, the scope's reticle steady on the distant target despite the weight and unfamiliar balance. She took her final breath, held at the natural respiratory pause, and pressed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure her father had taught her. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil absorbed by the compensator and Rachel's proper positioning. The world seemed to pause as the .50 caliber round traveled across 200 yards of mountain terrain, its path influenced by wind, gravity, and atmospheric conditions that would have made the shot impossible for all but the most skilled marksman. Through his spotting scope, Commander Mason tracked the bullet's flight path, watching for the impact that would determine whether Rachel Winters was simply an exceptional recreational shooter or something far more significant. The target exploded in a cloud of debris as the round struck dead center, creating a perfect hole that would have impressed Mason even if he'd made the shot himself. Around the observation area, Mason's SEAL team exchanged glances that combined respect with genuine amazement. They'd witnessed precision shooting that matched the best military snipers they'd worked with during multiple combat deployments. "Perfect center hit," Mason announced, his voice carrying across the range with unmistakable admiration. 200 yards, first round, unfamiliar weapon. That's exceptional shooting by any standard. Rachel worked the Barrett's bolt action smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge case while maintaining her shooting position. She'd felt the shot break cleanly and known immediately that her calculations and execution were correct. But Mason's confirmation provided validation that went beyond personal satisfaction. As she stood and began securing the rifle, Rachel noticed Reynolds watching her with an expression that combined vindication with something deeper, a respect that acknowledged shared connections to a legacy that few would ever understand. Mason approached, extending his hand to reclaim his Barrett. As Rachel returned the rifle, their eyes met in a moment of mutual recognition. Whether Mason knew the weapon's full history remained unclear, but he clearly recognized that Rachel's performance with it had been extraordinary. "That rifle has never been fired better," Mason said quietly, his words meant for Rachel alone. "Not even by me." The acknowledgement carried weight that transcended the day's evaluation. It represented recognition from one of the world's most elite marksmen that Rachel's skills were exceptional by any standard, military or civilian, formal or self-taught. As the SEALs began packing their equipment, Rachel noticed Harrison speaking with Mason, their conversation appearing intense and focused. Harrison's expression shifted from professional interest to surprise, and then to what appeared to be deep concern. Something in their discussion had clearly unsettled the Academy's commanding officer. Martinez approached Rachel with an expression that combined vindication and amazement. "That was extraordinary shooting," she said quietly. "I've never seen precision like that from a civilian shooter." 4 years of preparation," Rachel responded, beginning to clean and secure her own equipment. "My father always said that when opportunity meets preparation, extraordinary things become possible." As the day's evaluation concluded, Rachel became aware that something significant had changed in how she was being perceived, not just by the Academy staff, but by the SEALs as well. The dismissive glances had been replaced by measured assessment. The institutional suspicion had given way to professional respect. Her performance had transformed her status from questionable outsider to validated asset. What Rachel couldn't know was that her exhibition of extraordinary skill had triggered recognition that would soon uncover connections and histories that neither she nor the Academy had anticipated. As she packed her equipment and prepared to leave for the day, forces were already in motion that would reveal truths long buried in classified files and unacknowledged operations. The final day of evaluation would bring challenges that went beyond shooting skills into territory where personal history and institutional secrets collided with consequences that would redefine Rachel's understanding of both her father's legacy and her own future. Chapter 10. The Ultimate Challenge. The evening after Rachel's exceptional performance with the Barrett activity at the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy continued long after most civilian personnel had departed. In Colonel Harrison's office, a secure call was connecting the academy to Admiral Blackwell's command center at Naval Special Warfare Headquarters. The civilian shooter exceeded all parameters. Mason reported, his voice carrying the measured assessment of someone whose standards were seldom met, let alone surpassed. Her performance with the Barrett at extreme range was exceptional, better than most of our active duty snipers could manage under similar conditions. Admiral Blackwell's voice came through the secure line with the clarity of someone accustomed to making decisions based on limited information. Your assessment carries significant weight, Commander. Do you believe this civilian has potential value for our advanced training programs? Without question, Mason replied. Her shooting represents a combination of natural ability and disciplined training that we rarely encounter. More importantly, her adaptability under pressure suggests capabilities that extend beyond basic marksmanship. Harrison listened to the exchange with growing concern. Mason's assessment would elevate Rachel from temporary evaluation participant to potential asset for classified military programs, a transformation that demanded thorough vetting beyond what the Academy had conducted. There's still the matter of her security status, Harrison interjected. Her FBI application was rejected for reasons that remain classified. That red flag hasn't been resolved. I'll have that file unsealed, Admiral Blackwell responded. If this shooter has the capabilities Mason describes, we need to understand exactly why she was flagged. After the call ended, Harrison remained at his desk staring at Rachel's file with growing unease. Something about this situation felt wrong. Connections that seemed too convenient. Capabilities that appeared without institutional explanation, and now a weapon with origins that couldn't be coincidental. The Barrett that Mason carried had come into his possession through channels that Harrison had never questioned until now. The rifle's provenance had been listed as battlefield recovery unassigned, but Reynolds's whispered conversation with Mason after today's evaluation suggested a history more complex than official records indicated. Harrison opened a drawer and removed a worn, leather-bound notebook, his personal record from his final deployment with Special Forces. He flipped through pages until he found the entry from March 2011, an operation in the mountains of Afghanistan that had officially never occurred. The sparse notes recorded only the essential details. Task Force Echo diverted to support stranded team. Precision fire support from WW created extraction window. Mission success at extreme cost. Harrison stared at the initials WW for a long moment. William Winters had been the sniper assigned to that operation, a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong when intelligence failed to identify enemy reinforcements in the area. The official report listed Winters Barrett as equipment loss during emergency extraction. But rumors had circulated that the rifle had been recovered through unofficial channels. Now, more than a decade later, that same rifle had appeared in Mason's hands, and Winters' daughter was demonstrating shooting skills that matched or exceeded her father's legendary abilities. The coincidence stretched credibility beyond breaking point. Harrison closed the notebook and reached for his secure phone. The time had come to understand exactly who Rachel Winters was and why her FBI application had triggered security concerns that remained classified even from him. Tuesday evening found Rachel in her apartment meticulously cleaning her rifle while processing the day's events. The Barrett had felt familiar in ways that confirmed Reynolds's claim about its history. The worn grip, the trigger pull, the custom adjustments all carried the mark of her father's preferences and modifications. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, her father's combat rifle had found its way into Mason's possession, and now Rachel had fired it at the same extreme distance at which William had reportedly made his impossible shots in Afghanistan. Her phone rang, displaying Captain Martinez's number. "Rachel," Martinez said when she answered, "Colonel Harrison would like you at the academy by 600 tomorrow. There have been developments regarding your participation in the final evaluation." The careful neutrality in Martinez's tone suggested complications beyond standard procedure. "Is there a problem?" Rachel asked. "Not exactly," Martinez replied, "but Admiral Blackwell will be observing tomorrow's session personally. It's unusual for someone at her level to attend a training evaluation." After the call ended, Rachel sat motionless, considering the implications. Admiral Blackwell's presence elevated tomorrow's evaluation from professional assessment to high-level observation with potential consequences far beyond the Academy's normal operations. Something had changed, something significant enough to bring a flag officer to observe a civilian shooter's performance. Reynolds's revelation about the Barrett's history might be only part of a larger connection that was now emerging. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door, unusual at nearly 10 in the evening. Through the peephole, she saw Jake Reynolds standing in the hallway, still wearing his civilian clothes from the academy, but looking considerably more tense than he had during the day's evaluation. She opened the door cautiously. "Lieutenant Reynolds, may I come in?" he asked, his voice low. "There are things you need to know before tomorrow's evaluation." Rachel hesitated, then stepped aside to allow him entry. Reynolds moved into the apartment with the controlled awareness of someone trained to assess environments instantly. His eyes scanned the room, noting the ballistics charts on the desk and the technical manuals on the bookshelf. "I've taken a significant risk coming here," Reynolds said without preamble. "Mason doesn't know, and if anyone discovers this conversation occurred, there would be consequences." "Why take the risk?" Rachel asked, keeping a comfortable distance between them. "Because you deserve to know what's happening," Reynolds replied. "Admiral Blackwell hasn't just come to observe a training exercise. She's here because your performance with the Barrett triggered recognition algorithms in their operational database. The shot profile, the specific technique you used, matched only 2 other recorded instances in their system." Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "My father," Reynolds nodded. "William Winters made 2 documented shots with that exact profile, both at extreme range, both under combat conditions that should have made them impossible. The technique is distinctive, something about the breathing pattern and trigger control that creates a unique signature when analyzed by their ballistic computers." "What does this mean for tomorrow?" Rachel asked, her voice steady, despite the implications of Reynolds's revelation. "They're going to test you beyond anything you've experienced," Reynolds said. "Not just your shooting, but your adaptability, your decision-making under extreme pressure. They want to determine if your capabilities are coincidental, similarity, or something more inherited." The word carried implications that made Rachel uncomfortable. "You make it sound like they're treating this as some kind of genetic experiment." Reynolds shook his head. "Not genetic trained. Your father developed shooting techniques that defied conventional understanding. Abilities that couldn't be replicated through standard training programs. Now you're demonstrating those same capabilities without having gone through the formal systems that supposedly create them." "I told you he trained me for 4 years," Rachel said. "Which is precisely what interests them," Reynolds replied. "A civilian with no formal military background demonstrating skills that their best training programs struggle to produce after years of intensive instruction. You represent a challenge to institutional assumptions about how excellence is developed." Rachel considered this information carefully. "What's their real objective tomorrow?" "They want to see if you can replicate your father's most legendary shot," Reynolds said. "One 500 yards in variable crosswinds with a cold bore the shot he made in Afghanistan that saved my team. They've set up conditions to simulate that scenario as closely as possible. The challenge seemed designed to establish connections that went beyond coincidence, pushing into territory that questioned how such exceptional abilities could be developed outside institutional frameworks. Rachel understood suddenly that tomorrow's evaluation wasn't just about her shooting, it was about challenging fundamental assumptions regarding how elite skills were created and transmitted. "Why are you telling me this?" Rachel asked. Reynolds's expression became more personal than professional for the first time. "Because your father didn't just save my life, he saved my entire team when everyone else had written us off as acceptable losses. 16 men came home because William Winters made shots that should have been impossible. I owe him a debt I can never repay." The revelation carried emotional weight that transformed Rachel's understanding of tomorrow's challenge. This wasn't just about proving her capabilities or validating her training approach. It was about honoring a legacy that had saved lives in circumstances that officially never occurred. "There's one more thing you should know," Reynolds said, moving toward the door. "Harrison was there that day, the officer who made the call to extract our team when others wanted to write us off as lost. He and your father served together for years. He knows exactly who you are and has from the moment you applied to the academy." This final revelation struck Rachel with physical force. Harrison's scrutiny and suspicion had never been about security concerns. They were personal, connected to a history with her father that remained largely classified. "Why would he restrict my access if he knew my father?" Rachel asked. "That's something you'll have to ask him," Reynolds replied. "But I suspect it has more to do with guilt than security. The operation where your father lost that Barrett a lot went wrong that day. The kind of wrong that leaves survivors questioning their decisions for the rest of their lives." After Reynolds departed, Rachel remained awake long into the night, processing information that transformed her understanding of both the Academy's response to her abilities and tomorrow's final challenge. She wasn't just being evaluated as an exceptional shooter, she was being measured against her father's legendary skills in a test designed to determine whether excellence could be transmitted through direct training outside institutional systems. The implications extended far beyond her personal situation. If Rachel could demonstrate that her father's 4 years of personal instruction had produced skills matching or exceeding those developed through decades of institutional refinement, it would challenge fundamental assumptions about how elite capabilities were created and maintained. As dawn approached, Rachel prepared her equipment with the same methodical precision that had defined her approach to shooting since her father's first lessons. Today's challenge would test more than her marksmanship. It would examine her ability to honor a legacy that had saved lives through shots that defied conventional understanding. The Academy awaited with a final test that would determine whether Rachel Winters was simply an exceptional shooter or the inheritor of capabilities that transcended institutional expectations. Either way, today would transform her relationship with both the Academy and her understanding of her father's legacy. Dawn broke over the Blue Ridge Mountains with bands of amber and gold that painted the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy in surreal light. Rachel arrived at 05:45 hours, 15 minutes before her scheduled meeting with Harrison, hoping to observe the preparations without being immediately drawn into the day's events. The Academy grounds had been transformed overnight. Military vehicles with communications equipment lined the parking area. Security personnel in unmarked tactical gear maintained perimeters around the advanced ranges. Electronic target systems, far more sophisticated than the Academy's standard equipment, had been installed at distances extending beyond 1,500 yards. This was no longer a training evaluation, it had become something that more closely resembled a military field test. Whatever Rachel's performance had triggered yesterday, it had escalated the situation far beyond normal Academy operations. She parked her car in the visitor area and remained inside for several minutes, observing the heightened activity. Near the main administration building, she spotted a woman in naval uniform with the insignia of a Rear Admiral. Patricia Blackwell had arrived personally to observe today's proceedings. Beside her stood Commander Mason, his expression intense as he gestured toward the extended ranges. Rachel took a deep breath, centering herself as her father had taught her before high-pressure situations. She reached into her jacket pocket and touched the small metal disc William had given her before she'd left Montana, a silver dollar he'd carried through 3 combat tours. Not for luck, he'd told her. For reminder that fundamentals matter more than circumstances. The cool metal against her fingertips grounded her, connecting her to years of disciplined training and the calm voice that had guided her through thousands of repetitions. Whatever today's evaluation involved, she would approach it with the same methodical precision her father had instilled in her since her first lessons. As Rachel finally exited her vehicle, she noticed Jake Reynolds watching her from near the equipment building. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, resuming a conversation with another SEAL team member. Their midnight discussion remained their secret, but Reynolds's warning about today's true purpose weighed heavily on her mind. Captain Martinez approached as Rachel collected her equipment from the trunk. "Morning," Martinez said, her tone professional, but her expression betraying concern. "Colonel Harrison is waiting in his office. He asked that you come directly there before the day's evaluation begins." Rachel nodded, shouldering her rifle case and following Martinez toward the administration building. Around them, Academy staff and SEAL team members prepared for evaluations that had clearly expanded beyond the original parameters. The atmosphere carried tension that hadn't been present during previous sessions. The Academy's main building, constructed in the late 1970s from local stone and timber, had originally served as a hunting lodge before being converted to its current purpose. Its rustic exterior concealed modern facilities designed for specialized training and evaluation. Rachel had spent limited time in the administrative sections. Her previous interactions focused primarily on the shooting ranges that defined the Academy's primary function. As they walked, Martinez maintained professional distance but seemed to struggle with unspoken concerns. Finally, as they approached Harrison's office, she paused and turned to Rachel. "What you did yesterday with the Barrett, I've been teaching advanced marksmanship for 15 years and never seen anything like it," Martinez said, her voice low to avoid being overheard by personnel moving through nearby corridors. "Mason doesn't let anyone touch that rifle. The fact that he handed it to you then, watched you make that shot." She shook her head slightly, leaving the implications unspoken. Rachel appreciated Martinez's support, but maintained the quiet focus that had become her trademark. Responding to praise or acknowledging exceptional performance would break the concentration she needed for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her father had taught her that excellence required emotional consistency, neither highs nor lows, just steady execution regardless of circumstances. They arrived at Harrison's office, where an armed security specialist stood outside the door, an unusual precaution that further confirmed the day's elevated status. The guard nodded to Martinez and opened the door without announcement, revealing a transformed administrative space. Harrison's office had been converted since yesterday. The usual administrative space now contained additional communications equipment, security monitors, and a digital tactical display showing the Academy's extended ranges. On his desk sat an array of folders marked with security classifications well above what normal Academy operations would require. The office now resembled a military command center more than an administrator's workspace. Multiple screens displayed different sections of the Academy grounds, focusing particularly on the extended ranges where today's evaluation would clearly take place. Technical specialists operated equipment that appeared designed for detailed performance analysis rather than simple observation. Harrison stood when Rachel entered, his expression unreadable. At 62, his military bearing remained evident despite his transition to civilian administration. The silver-gray hair and deep lines around his eyes spoke of decades in environments where decisions carried life-or-death consequences. Today, those eyes studied Rachel with an intensity that suggested stakes beyond normal evaluation parameters. "Miss Winters, thank you for arriving early. We have matters to discuss before today's evaluation begins." Rachel remained standing, her posture relaxed but alert. "Yes, sir." Harrison studied her for a moment, seemingly weighing decisions that had been long in formation. "I've been authorized to inform you that your performance yesterday has attracted attention at levels beyond this academy. Admiral Blackwell has come personally to observe today's evaluation, which will involve scenarios designed to test capabilities at the extreme limits of what we consider possible." Rachel nodded, but offered no comment, waiting for Harrison to reveal the true purpose behind this meeting. "Before we proceed, however, there's a matter we need to address." Harrison continued, opening a folder on his desk. "Your application to this academy was processed under standard protocols, but subsequent background checks revealed information that prompted security concerns." "My rejected FBI application?" Rachel said, deciding that passive acceptance would no longer serve her purposes. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're aware of that situation." "I know my application was rejected with no explanation provided," Rachel replied. "What I don't know is why that rejection influenced my status here, or why you failed to mention your history with my father when restricting my access to advanced ranges." The direct statement landed with visible impact. Harrison's composure slipped momentarily, revealing surprise that Rachel possessed this information. He glanced toward the closed door, then back to Rachel with recalculated assessment. "Who told you about my service with your father?" "Does it matter?" Rachel countered. "What matters is that you knew exactly who I was from the moment I applied, yet you treated my abilities as security concerns rather than the results of training by someone you served alongside." Harrison's expression hardened. "Your father's methods were classified. His techniques were developed under programs that remain under security restrictions. When you demonstrated those same capabilities without explanation, it raised legitimate questions about how you acquired them." "He was my father," Rachel said simply. "He taught me everything he knew." "Which is precisely what concerned us," Harrison replied. "William Winters was the finest sniper I ever served with, but his techniques were developed through specialized programs that officially never existed. When you began demonstrating those same techniques without having gone through those programs, it created a security situation we had to address." Rachel maintained the steady calm her father had taught her during high-stress situations. "And my FBI rejection. How does that factor into this situation?" Harrison opened another folder and turned it so Rachel could see its contents. The document revealed her FBI application with a security notation that froze her blood. Subject's father, William Winters, USASF Ret. Connected to classified incident codenamed Ghost Shot. Possible unauthorized disclosure of classified techniques. Security clearance denied pending investigation. The file contained additional notations that painted an institutional picture of suspicion and security concerns. Background investigations had flagged William's extended time with Rachel during training sessions. Ballistic similarities between her documented shooting patterns and classified profiles had triggered automated security protocols. Her unexpected appearance at the academy demonstrating techniques that supposedly required specialized training had activated institutional defense mechanisms designed to protect classified methodologies. They rejected you because they believed your father might have violated security protocols by training you. Harrison explained, his tone softening slightly. What they didn't understand, what none of us fully appreciated, was that William had developed methods for transmitting elite skills through direct instruction that bypassed traditional institutional frameworks. The revelation clarified months of frustration and restriction. Rachel hadn't been flagged for security concerns about her own actions, but because her abilities suggested her father had shared classified techniques outside authorized channels. My father never violated any security protocols, Rachel said firmly. He taught me fundamentals and principles, not classified techniques. And yet you shoot exactly as he did, Harrison countered. Your performance profile with the Barrett yesterday matched his documented pattern, precisely breathing rhythm, trigger control, follow-through. These aren't coincidental similarities, Rachel. They're techniques that took military programs decades to develop and refine. As Harrison spoke, Rachel noticed additional documents on his desk, performance analyses, comparing her shooting metrics with what appeared to be her father's documented patterns. The similarities were undeniable, with overlapping data points that created almost perfect correlation between their respective techniques. Whatever specialized programs William had participated in, they had clearly documented his methodologies in extraordinary detail. For what it's worth, Harrison continued, his tone shifting from official to personal. I never believed William violated security protocols. He understood classification requirements better than most of the officers who created them. But when you appeared here demonstrating his exact techniques, it created a situation we had to address through established channels. Before Rachel could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Captain Martinez entered, her expression professional but urgent. Sir Admiral Blackwell is requesting Miss Winters at the extended range. They're ready to begin the final evaluation phase. Harrison nodded, closing the folders on his desk. We'll continue this discussion later. For now, you need to understand that today's evaluation has implications beyond your personal situation. If you can demonstrate that your father's direct instruction produced capabilities matching those developed through classified programs, it could transform how we approach training for elite skills. As Rachel followed Martinez toward the extended range, she processed Harrison's revelations with growing clarity. Today's evaluation wasn't just about her shooting or even her father's legacy. It was about challenging fundamental assumptions regarding how exceptional capabilities were developed and transmitted. The institutional frameworks that had dismissed and restricted her weren't simply being protective. They were defending established methodologies that Rachel's capabilities threatened to invalidate. If William Winters could transmit elite skills to his daughter through direct instruction, decades of specialized training programs might be rendered obsolete or fundamentally flawed. The morning air carried the distinct scent of pine and mountain vegetation as Rachel and Martinez made their way toward the Academy's most distant range facilities. The path wound through wooded sections before opening onto the extended range that had been configured for the day's primary evaluation. This section of the Academy, rarely used, except for the most advanced training, stretched nearly a mile into the mountain valley, with target positions at intervals that exceeded normal precision shooting parameters. Under ordinary circumstances, only the most experienced military and law enforcement snipers would be permitted access to these facilities. Today, those restrictions had been superseded by authority far beyond the Academy's normal command structure. The extended range had been configured for what was clearly the day's primary test. At the firing position, Commander Mason stood beside Admiral Blackwell and several technical specialists operating equipment that appeared designed for detailed performance analysis. Beyond them stretched nearly a mile of mountain terrain leading to targets positioned at extreme distances. Admiral Blackwell turned as Rachel approached her, assessing gaze, taking in every detail of Rachel's appearance and equipment. In her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, Blackwell carried the quiet authority of someone who had navigated decades in the male-dominated world of naval special operations. Her uniform displayed the ribbons and insignia of extended combat deployments and specialized command assignments. The Admiral's presence at what should have been a routine training evaluation confirmed that Rachel's performance had triggered recognition at levels far beyond the Academy's normal operations. "Miss Winters," Blackwell said, extending her hand, "your performance yesterday was exceptional. Today we'd like to explore the full extent of your capabilities under conditions designed to simulate extreme operational scenarios." Rachel shook the Admiral's hand firmly. "I understand, ma'am." "I doubt that you do fully," Blackwell replied with surprising candor. "But perhaps you will, by day's end. Commander Mason will explain the parameters of today's evaluation." Mason stepped forwards, his expression serious but lacking the skepticism that had characterized their first meeting. The commander's assessment of Rachel had clearly evolved from professional curiosity to genuine respect, a transition reflected in subtle changes to his body language and tone when addressing her. Today's final assessment involves precision engagement under conditions that simulate actual combat operations. Mason explained, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who weighed each word carefully. "The target is positioned at 1,500 yards across variable terrain with multiple wind channels and atmospheric distortion." Rachel recognized the description immediately, the exact conditions Reynolds had described from the Afghanistan operation, where her father had made his legendary shots. "You'll be using my Barrett .50 caliber rifle," Mason continued, gesturing to where the weapon rested on a shooting table. "Cold bore one shot with limited preparation time. This represents the most challenging scenario we can create in a controlled environment." The Barrett gleamed in the morning sun, its massive frame positioned on a specialized shooting table with proper supports and alignment tools. The weapon had been meticulously prepared, its barrel cleaned and optics calibrated to Mason's exacting standards. This wasn't just equipment, it was a precision instrument that carried its own history and significance. Rachel nodded, understanding now why Reynolds had felt compelled to warn her. This wasn't just a test of her shooting abilities, it was a deliberate recreation of the circumstances under which her father had performed actions that saved lives, including Reynolds's own. "Before we proceed," Admiral Blackwell interjected, "I want to be clear about what we're evaluating today, Miss Winters. Your shooting skills are exceptional. That's already been established. What interests us is how those skills were developed outside traditional training frameworks. Your father was part of programs that explored accelerated skill transmission, but the results were never fully documented before his retirement." The revelation confirmed suspicions Rachel had harbored for years. Her father's insistence on certain training approaches, his emphasis on mental conditioning alongside physical technique, his focus on what he called the perfect marriage of mind and action. These weren't just personal preferences, but methodologies developed through classified programs. Blackwell gestured toward the technical specialists positioned nearby, their equipment far more sophisticated than standard performance monitoring systems. "We'll be recording comprehensive data on your shooting process, breathing patterns, trigger pressure, eye movement, body position adjustments. These metrics will be compared against documented profiles from specialized training programs to assess correlation and deviation." The Admiral's explanation revealed that today's evaluation went far beyond simple accuracy measurement. Rachel wasn't just being tested on whether she could make an extremely difficult shot, she was being analyzed at the most fundamental level to determine how precisely her techniques matched specialized methodologies that had been developed through classified programs. "If you can perform at the level we've designed today's test to measure," Blackwell continued, "it would validate theories about skill transmission that have significant implications for how we approach training for specialized capabilities." Rachel understood the stakes with sudden clarity. Her performance today wouldn't just determine her own status, it could influence how future generations of precision shooters were trained. The institutional frameworks that had dismissed her might be forced to reconsider their approach if she demonstrated that her father's direct instruction had produced results matching or exceeding their carefully structured programs. "I'm ready," Rachel said simply. Mason nodded and gestured toward the Barrett. "The rifle is zeroed to my specifications. You'll have 5 minutes to familiarize yourself with its current setup, then we'll proceed with the evaluation." As Rachel approached the Barrett, she noted the technical specialist's positioning sensors that would record every aspect of her performance. breathing patterns, minute body movements, eye-tracking pulse rate. This wasn't just observation. It was detailed analysis designed to capture the methodology behind her shooting. The Barrett rested on the table exactly as it had yesterday, its massive frame gleaming in the morning sun. As Rachel began her examination, she noticed additional markings that confirmed its history. A small notch on the stock, where her father had recorded confirmed engagements, wear patterns, on the grip that matched his distinctive hold, subtle modifications to the trigger assembly that reflected his preference for a clean light break. The rifle's scope had been adjusted to Mason's specifications, but Rachel could see where previous settings had been marked tiny reference points that corresponded to her father's preferred zero adjustments. The bipod showed wear patterns consistent with William's deployment technique, slightly angled to compensate for his natural shooting position. Even the custom cheek rest had been positioned to accommodate her father's distinctive eye relief preferences, a minor adjustment that most observers would never notice, but that confirmed the weapon's history beyond any doubt. This wasn't just a similar model, it was the exact rifle William had used during operations that officially never occurred. This weapon carried more than mechanical functionality. It held the history of operations that had saved lives under circumstances so classified they officially never occurred. That it had found its way back to her represented a convergence that seemed beyond coincidence. As Rachel completed her examination, she became aware of Reynolds watching from nearby. His expression, a mixture of anticipation and concern. Their shared understanding of the Barrett's significance remained unspoken, but his presence reminded her that today's performance had implications beyond institutional validation. Around the evaluation area, SEAL team members maintained professional distance, but observed with undisguised interest. The Academy staff, who had initially dismissed Rachel, now watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to grudging respect. Colonel Harrison had positioned himself beside Admiral Blackwell, his attention focused entirely on Rachel's preparation process. "Time," Mason announced. "Target is the red diamond at the base of the far ridge, 500 yards. Wind is variable 8 to 15 miles per hour, with cross currents in the valley." "Whenever you're ready, Miss Winters." Rachel positioned herself behind the Barrett, establishing her shooting platform with the methodical precision her father had drilled into her through thousands of repetitions. The familiar ritual centered her, clearing extraneous thoughts and focusing her awareness on the immediate task. She adjusted her body position to accommodate the Barrett's substantial recoil, establishing proper alignment with the rifle's axis. Her cheek found the optimal contact point with the stock, creating the consistent positioning that ensured proper eye relief and sight picture. Her breathing settled into the rhythmic pattern that William had emphasized as foundational to exceptional shooting, slow controlled inhalations followed by measured exhalations. Through the scope she could see the target, a small red diamond that appeared tiny, even with the Barrett's powerful optics. Between her position and the target lay nearly a mile of mountain terrain with multiple elevation changes, creating air currents that would influence the bullet's path in complex ways. The morning sun created heat mirage effects that distorted the image slightly, requiring mental compensation for apparent versus actual target position. Shadows from the eastern ridge created temperature differentials that would affect air density along the bullet's path. The target itself was positioned where sunlight created a slight glare effect, challenging precise aiming point identification. Rachel analyzed the conditions systematically, identifying primary and secondary wind indicators. Near her position, grass movements suggested an 8-mile-per-hour wind from the southwest. Midway to the target heat, mirage indicated cross currents moving from west to east. Near the target itself, vegetation movement revealed another wind shift back to a southwesterly direction. These layered variables would require compensation beyond standard ballistic calculations. exactly the kind of complex environmental reading her father had specialized in during his operational career. This wasn't just a test of shooting mechanics, but of environmental analysis under conditions where textbook solutions failed. Rachel made minute adjustments to her position, aligning her natural point of aim precisely with the target. Her left hand fine-tuned the bipod position while her right established proper grip tension on the rifle's stock. The Barrett's weight settled into her shoulder, creating the stable platform essential for extreme distance precision. The technical specialists monitored their equipment recording data that would later be compared against performance profiles from elite military snipers. Admiral Blackwell and Colonel Harrison watched with expressions that revealed the significance they attached to this moment. Mason stood at the spotting scope, his posture revealing both professional assessment and personal interest in whether his Barrett would perform at its highest potential. As Rachel made her final calculations, she found herself remembering her father's words during a particularly challenging training session years earlier. The bullet follows physics, not wishes. Understand the environment completely, make your adjustments precisely, and trust your analysis absolutely. William had emphasized that exceptional shooting wasn't about hoping for favorable conditions, but about reading existing conditions so thoroughly that adjustments became automatic rather than analytical. The true master didn't fight the environment, but worked within it, understanding its influences so completely that compensation became intuitive rather than calculated. Rachel settled into her final position, finding the natural point of aim and establishing her breathing rhythm. The massive rifle seemed to become part of her body, an extension of will rather than separate equipment. The scope's reticle steadied on the distant target as she made final micro-adjustments for the complex wind conditions. She took her final breath, held at the natural respiratory pause, and pressed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure. William had taught her the same technique he had used to make impossible shots that saved lives in circumstances that officially never occurred. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil absorbed by the compensator and Rachel's proper positioning. The world seemed to pause as the .50 caliber round traveled across 1,500 yards of mountain terrain, its path influenced by wind, gravity, and atmospheric conditions that would have made the shot impossible for all but the most skilled marksman. Through the spotting scope, Mason tracked the bullet's flight, his experience allowing him to follow its path despite the speed and distance involved. The technical specialists monitored their equipment recording data that would be compared against performance profiles from decades of institutional analysis. For 2:13 seconds, the time required for the round to travel from barrel to target, the evaluation area remained absolutely silent. No one spoke, moved, or even seemed to breathe as they awaited confirmation of what their collective experience suggested was virtually impossible. The target exploded in a cloud of debris as the round struck dead center, creating a perfect hole that validated every aspect of Rachel's preparation and execution. Around the observation area, reactions ranged from professional acknowledgement to open amazement. They had witnessed precision shooting at a level that few humans could achieve, a perfect integration of analysis technique and execution under conditions designed to make success virtually impossible. "Direct hit, center mass," Mason announced, his voice carrying the measured assessment of someone whose standards were seldom met. Perfect execution under extreme conditions. Admiral Blackwell stepped forward, her expression revealing that Rachel's performance had confirmed theories or expectations that extended beyond this single demonstration. "Well done, Miss Winters. Your father would be proud not just of your shooting, but of what your performance represents for how we understand skill transmission." Rachel rose from her position behind the Barrett, maintaining the calm focus that had defined her approach throughout the evaluation. She had done more than make an extremely difficult shot. She had validated a training methodology that challenged institutional assumptions about how excellence was developed. As Rachel secured the Barrett, She became aware of Harrison watching her with an expression that combined professional assessment with personal recognition. Whatever his history with her father, today's performance had forced a re-evaluation of assumptions that had guided his approach to Rachel's abilities. The technical specialists continued monitoring their equipment, analyzing data that would later be compared against performance profiles from elite military snipers. Their expressions suggested the results were already providing insights that challenged established understanding about skill development and transmission. One specialist approached Admiral Blackwell, showing her data on a specialized tablet. The Admiral studied the information with intense focus before nodding and gesturing for Harrison to join their conversation. Whatever the data revealed, it clearly confirmed or exceeded expectations that had brought Blackwell personally to this evaluation. "Miss Winters," Admiral Blackwell said as the technical team completed their immediate analysis, "your performance profile matches your father's documented pattern with 97% correlation, a level of similarity that exceeds what we typically see even between instructors and their most accomplished students in specialized programs." The technical confirmation validated what Rachel had demonstrated through performance. Her father's direct instruction had produced capabilities matching those developed through decades of institutional refinement. This wasn't coincidental similarity, but deliberate transmission of elite skills through methodologies that bypassed traditional training frameworks. "I'd like you to join us for a debriefing session," Blackwell continued. "Your insights into how your father trained you could have significant implications for how we approach specialized instruction moving forward." As Rachel followed Blackwell toward the administration building, she noticed Reynolds watching from nearby, his expression conveying both respect and a deeper acknowledgement of connections that extended beyond today's performance. Whatever debt he felt he owed to William Winters, Rachel's demonstration had honored that legacy in ways that transcended institutional validation. The day's evaluation had transformed Rachel's status from questionable outsider to validated asset. More importantly, it had proven that excellence could be transmitted through direct instruction when founded on proper principles and methodologies, a validation that would challenge fundamental assumptions about how elite capabilities were developed and maintained. What Rachel couldn't know was that her performance had set in motion processes that would redefine her relationship with both the academy and military training programs. The outsider, who had been restricted based on security concerns, was about to become central to initiatives that could transform how specialized skills were taught to future generations. Chapter 12. Higher Authority. The debriefing room in the Academy's administration building had been transformed into a secure briefing area with communications equipment, digital displays, and recording systems that exceeded normal civilian facilities. As Rachel entered, she found Admiral Blackwell, Commander Mason Colonel Harrison, and several technical specialists waiting around a conference table laden with documentation and analysis equipment. The room's windows had been covered with specialized material that prevented electronic surveillance, and a signal jamming device hummed quietly in one corner. This level of security exceeded anything Rachel had previously encountered at the Academy, confirming that today's evaluation involved matters far beyond normal training assessment. "Please, Miss Winters, have a seat," Admiral Blackwell said, gesturing to an open chair. "What we're about to discuss involves matters that remain classified, but given your performance and your father's involvement, you've been granted temporary clearance for this conversation." Rachel sat noting the formal atmosphere and the recording devices positioned to capture the discussion. This wasn't a casual debriefing, but a documented session with potential implications beyond today's evaluation. "First, let me be direct about what we've observed," Blackwell began. "Your shooting performance demonstrates capabilities that match or exceed our most elite snipers despite your lack of formal military training. More significantly, your technique precisely mirrors methodologies developed through classified programs in which your father participated. One of the technical specialists activated a display screen showing side-by-side performance metrics, Rachel's shooting data compared with what appeared to be her father's documented patterns. The correlation was unmistakable, with overlapping data points creating almost perfect alignment between their respective techniques. These performance profiles show breathing patterns, trigger pressure application, body position, micro-adjustments, and environmental compensation techniques, the specialist explained. The similarity exceeds 97% correlation across all measured parameters, a level of consistency we've never documented between separate individuals, even in our most controlled training programs. The technical confirmation validated what Rachel had demonstrated through performance. Her father's direct instruction had produced capabilities that precisely matched specialized techniques developed through classified programs. This wasn't coincidental similarity, but deliberate transmission of elite skills through methodologies that bypassed traditional training frameworks. Harrison opened a folder and slid several documents across the table toward Rachel. Project Apex was initiated in 2002 to develop accelerated training protocols for specialized skills. Your father was one of the primary subjects, a natural marksman whose abilities were studied to identify transmissible components that could be taught to others. The documents revealed a program far more extensive than Rachel had imagined, with William Winters listed as primary subject alpha in studies of exceptional performance under extreme conditions. Technical analyses, psychological profiles, and performance metrics created a detailed examination of what made her father's shooting abilities so extraordinary. What these studies discovered, Blackwell continued, was that exceptional performance wasn't just about physical technique or equipment familiarity. It involved integrated systems of perception analysis and execution that traditional training approaches failed to develop effectively. The Admiral gestured toward additional documentation that detailed experimental training methodologies based on Williams' performance patterns. Conventional training focuses on standardized techniques applied sequentially: position, breathing, trigger control, follow-through. What your father demonstrated was an integrated approach, where these elements functioned as a unified system rather than separate components. Mason leaned forward, his expression more animated than Rachel had previously observed. Your father could make shots that our ballistics experts deemed impossible, not because he defied physics, but because he processed environmental variables more completely than our training programs could teach. The commander pointed to specific data points in the performance analysis. Look at the breathing pattern during your shot at 1,500 yards. The rhythm doesn't just slow heart rate and stabilize position. It synchronizes with natural body tremors to create stability windows that conventional techniques can't achieve. This isn't something that can be taught through standard instruction methods. The revelation confirmed what Rachel had experienced during her years of training with William. His instruction had focused not just on mechanical shooting skills, but on developing perceptual abilities that allowed her to read environments as integrated systems rather than collections of separate variables. When you began demonstrating these same capabilities, Harrison said, without having gone through the formal programs that supposedly created them, it raised profound questions about how such skills are actually developed and transmitted. My father never revealed classified information, Rachel said firmly. He taught me fundamentals and principles, not secret techniques. That's precisely what makes your performance so significant, Blackwell replied. He didn't need to share classified methodologies because he had internalized the underlying principles so completely that they became part of how he approached instruction naturally. The technical specialists presented additional analysis from Rachel's shooting demonstrations, comparing her performance metrics with documented profiles from elite military snipers. The similarities were undeniable, not just in accuracy, but in the specific patterns of breathing, trigger control, and environmental analysis that characterized exceptional performance. What your capabilities suggest, Blackwell continued, is that our institutional approach to developing specialized skills may be fundamentally flawed. We've built elaborate training programs around standardized methodologies when direct transmission from genuine experts might prove far more effective. The implication was profound. Rachel's performance challenged not just specific training approaches, but entire institutional frameworks built around standardized instruction. If William Winters could transmit elite capabilities to his daughter through direct instruction, similar approaches might transform how specialized skills were developed throughout military and intelligence communities. Which brings us to why I'm here personally, Blackwell said. Naval Special Warfare is developing a new approach to specialized training, focusing on direct instruction from genuine experts rather than standardized methodologies. Your performance suggests this approach has merit that deserves serious exploration. Rachel understood the direction this conversation was taking. You want me to participate in this program. We want you to help us understand how your father trained you, Blackwell corrected. The specific exercises, the progression of skills, the mental frameworks, he emphasized these details could help us develop more effective approaches to training the next generation of specialized operators. Mason placed several photographs on the table operational images showing special operations teams in what appeared to be Afghanistan and Iraq. These men depend on skills that our current training approaches take years to develop with variable results. If we could identify more efficient transmission methods based on your experience, it could fundamentally transform operational capabilities and potentially save lives. The offer represented validation beyond anything Rachel had anticipated. Her abilities, which had been treated as security concerns, were now being recognized as valuable models for future training approaches. The outsider, who had been restricted based on institutional suspicion, was being invited to help transform those same institutions. Before you consider this offer, Harrison interjected, there's something you should know about your father's service and my connection to him. He opened another folder, this one containing operational reports with extensive redactions. The mission where your father lost his Barrett, the operation that was later codenamed Ghost Shot, was under my command. The admission shifted the atmosphere in the room. Mason and Blackwell exchanged glances that suggested this information moved beyond professional assessment into personal history that remained sensitive even years later. We were tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from a region controlled by hostile forces. Harrison continued, his voice taking on the distant quality of someone revisiting difficult memories. Intelligence failed to identify enemy reinforcements in the area. When our extraction team became surrounded, William positioned himself at extreme range to provide covering fire that could create an extraction window. Harrison spread several satellite images showing mountainous terrain with marked positions indicating troop movements and strategic locations. Our team was here in this valley. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away across open terrain with minimal cover. Enemy forces had established positions throughout these ridgelines, creating interlocking fields of fire that made movement virtually impossible. Harrison's expression revealed the weight of memories that clearly remained vivid despite the passage of years. The required shots were beyond what our operational parameters considered possible, 500 yards through multiple wind channels in fading light conditions. When I expressed doubt about the feasibility, your father simply said, "Trust the preparation, not the probability." The phrase hit Rachel with physical impact, words her father had repeated during countless training sessions when she doubted her ability to make particularly challenging shots. Trust the preparation, not the probability. Focus on process, not outcome. Execute perfectly, and let results follow naturally. William made 3 successive shots at targets our spotters could barely identify, Harrison continued. Those shots created the window that allowed our team to extract with the asset. During the final extraction, your father came under direct fire, and was forced to abandon his position without his Barrett. The official report listed the rifle as equipment loss, but unofficial channels later recovered it from a weapons cache captured near the Pakistan border. Harrison closed the folder containing the operational reports, his expression suggesting memories that went beyond what official documentation could capture. What the reports don't convey is that William's actions that day saved 16 lives, men who would have been sacrificed if we'd followed standard operational protocols. His shots weren't just technically impressive, they altered the course of operations that influenced national security outcomes for years afterward. The rifle's journey from abandoned equipment to Mason's personal weapon remained unspecified, but Rachel understood enough to recognize the significance of its return to her hands during yesterday's evaluation. The Barrett carried a history that connected her directly to her father's operational legacy. "When you appeared at this academy demonstrating skills that mirrored your father's," Harrison said, "I reacted from a place of institutional caution rather than personal recognition. That was a mistake for which I owe you an apology." The acknowledgement carried weight beyond professional courtesy. It represented admission that the academy had fundamentally misunderstood both Rachel's capabilities and how they had been developed. "Your father saved my life that day," Harrison continued, his voice quieter than before. "Not just mine, but everyone on that team. When I saw you shooting with his exact technique, not similar but identical, it triggered security protocols, but it also raised personal questions I wasn't prepared to address." This additional revelation explained the intensity of Harrison's initial scrutiny beyond institutional security concerns. Rachel's presence had forced confrontation with memories and obligations that remained unresolved years after the operation that had connected him to William Winters. "Which brings us to the present situation," Admiral Blackwell said, returning the discussion to its primary purpose. "Based on your performance and the analysis of our technical specialists, we'd like to offer you a position with our Advanced Training Development Program. Your insights could help transform how we approach specialized instruction for the next generation of operators." Blackwell slid a formal document across the table, a position description outlining responsibilities, compensation, and security requirements. This would involve working directly with our technical specialists to document the training methodologies your father employed. Initially, at our Virginia Beach facility with potential field application once preliminary protocols are established. The offer represented complete validation of everything Rachel had worked toward, recognition that her abilities warranted not just acceptance, but emulation. The outsider, who had been restricted based on security concerns, was being invited to help redesign the very systems that had initially rejected her. Before Rachel could respond, Mason spoke with unexpected directness. "There's something else you should know before making any decisions." He reached into his pocket and removed a small object wrapped in protective cloth. "This belongs to you now." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a tarnished brass casing mounted on a small wooden base. Etched into the casing were coordinates, a date, and the simple notation 1-500 yards, Operation Ghost Shot, WW. "This is the casing from the first round your father fired during that operation," Mason explained. "He gave it to me years later when circumstances brought us together during another deployment. He said to keep it until I found someone who could truly appreciate what it represented." The simple object carried emotional significance far beyond its physical presence, a tangible connection to her father's legacy and recognition that Rachel had demonstrated capabilities worthy of that heritage. "Your father wasn't just an exceptional shooter," Mason continued. "He was someone who understood that genuine excellence transcends institutional validation. The skills he developed weren't valuable because some programs certified them, they were valuable because they worked when nothing else could." The assessment cut to the heart of what William had taught Rachel throughout their years of training together. Excellence existed independent of recognition. Performance mattered more than credentials. True capability revealed itself when circumstances demanded impossible outcomes. Rachel accepted the brass casing, feeling its weight and history in her palm. "Thank you. This means more than any official recognition." Admiral Blackwell allowed a moment of respectful silence before returning to the matter at hand. "Miss Winters, we understand this is a significant decision that requires careful consideration. The position we're offering would involve temporary relocation to our training facility in Virginia Beach with appropriate compensation and accommodations." "What exactly would my role involve?" Rachel asked. "Initially, documentation of the training methodologies your father employed," Blackwell replied, "working with our technical specialists to identify transmissible components that could be incorporated into revised training protocols. Eventually, direct instruction of selected candidates to test the effectiveness of these approaches." One of the technical specialists activated another display screen showing a conceptual framework for skill transmission methodology. "We are particularly interested in the progression your father used, how he sequenced instruction, the balance between technical skills and perceptual development, the mental frameworks he emphasized during different stages of training." Mason pointed to specific elements in the framework. "Conventional approaches start with mechanical fundamentals and gradually introduce environmental variables. Your performance suggests a different progression, one that integrates environmental reading from the beginning rather than treating it as an advanced component." The opportunity represented everything Rachel had been working toward, not just recognition of her abilities, but the chance to help others develop similar capabilities through approaches that honored her father's legacy. The outsider, who had been dismissed and restricted, would become instrumental in reshaping how elite skills were transmitted to future generations. "I'll need time to consider this offer," Rachel said. "My university studies are important to me, and this would represent a significant change in direction." "Of course," Blackwell acknowledged. "We'll provide detailed information about the position, including arrangements that would allow you to complete your degree while participating in our program. Take whatever time you need to make an informed decision." As the debriefing concluded, Rachel found herself in a position that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. The academy that had restricted her access based on security concerns was now acknowledging that her abilities represented valuable models for future training approaches. The institutional frameworks that had dismissed her were being forced to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about how elite skills were developed and transmitted. Walking from the administration building, Rachel noticed Reynolds waiting near the parking area, his posture suggesting he had deliberately positioned himself where she would pass. As she approached, he straightened from his casual lean against a vehicle. "I heard it went well," he said simply. Rachel nodded, aware that the specifics of her debriefing remained classified, even from someone with Reynolds' security clearance. "They've offered me a position with their training development program." Reynolds smiled slightly. "Your father would be proud, not just of your shooting, but of what your performance represents validation, that excellence can be developed outside traditional channels when the instruction is right." The assessment captured exactly what William had emphasized throughout their years of training together. Genuine capability wasn't about institutional certification, but about performance when circumstances demanded exceptional results. Excellence existed independent of recognition, revealing itself most clearly when facing challenges that exceeded normal parameters. "Thank you for telling me about the Barrett," Rachel said. Knowing its history made today's evaluation more meaningful than just technical demonstration. Reynolds nodded, understanding the significance that transcended professional assessment. "That rifle has saved more lives than most people will ever know. Seems appropriate that it found its way back to someone who can truly appreciate what it represents." He hesitated, then continued with careful consideration of his words. "Your shot today, the way you read those wind conditions through multiple channels, that was something I've only seen once before. Your father made the exact same adjustments during Ghost Shot, compensating for variables most people couldn't even detect. The confirmation of their technical similarity carried emotional weight beyond professional validation. Rachel had connected with her father's legacy through performance that honored his methods and principles, demonstrating that his training had transmitted not just mechanical skills, but perceptual abilities that defined genuine excellence. "I need to tell you something else," Reynolds said, his voice lower than before. "Something that wasn't in the official briefing. Your father didn't just save our team that day. The asset we extracted provided intelligence that prevented multiple terrorist attacks against civilian targets. Thousands of people are alive today because William Winters could make shots that official doctrine deemed impossible." This additional context transformed Rachel's understanding of her father's operational significance. William had never discussed specific missions or outcomes, maintaining the security protocols that defined his service. Learning that his exceptional skills had saved not just military personnel, but countless civilians, added dimension to the legacy she had inherited through his training. "Thank you for telling me," Rachel said simply. Reynolds nodded, understanding that some recognitions required no elaborate acknowledgement. "Whatever you decide about their offer, you've already validated everything your father believed about how excellence is developed. Institutional certification doesn't create capability, proper training and dedicated practice do." As Reynolds walked away, Rachel realized that her journey had come full circle. The outsider who had been dismissed and restricted had proven that excellence could transcend institutional validation. The abilities that had been treated as security concerns were now being recognized as valuable models for future approaches to specialized training. Whatever she decided about Admiral Blackwell's offer, Rachel had validated everything her father had taught her about genuine capability and how it was developed. Excellence didn't require institutional certification to exist. It revealed itself most clearly when circumstances demanded exceptional performance under conditions where normal standards proved insufficient. Chapter 13: Legacy and Future. 6 weeks after her final evaluation at the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy, Rachel stood in the facility's Advanced Instruction Center, wearing instructor credentials that represented a transformation nobody could have predicted when she'd first walked through the Academy's gates months earlier. The formal recognition ceremony had taken place the previous week, with Admiral Patricia Blackwell personally presenting Rachel with a civilian marksmanship commendation that acknowledged her contribution to naval special warfare training development. The citation specifically noted that her shooting had validated counter-sniper protocols now being implemented throughout special operations units. Miss Winters' exceptional precision shooting and tactical adaptability provided opposition that enhanced military training effectiveness and contributed to operational readiness, Admiral Blackwell had stated during the presentation. Her performance represents the highest standards of civilian support for military training objectives. The ceremony had been attended by Academy staff, select military personnel, and specialized training developers who had traveled specifically to witness recognition of capabilities that challenged institutional frameworks. What had begun as skepticism and restriction had transformed into acknowledgement that excellence could emerge through pathways that traditional systems failed to recognize or validate. Colonel Harrison's public acknowledgement of institutional failures had been equally significant, though more personally meaningful to Rachel. During a facility-wide briefing, Harrison had formally apologized for restrictions that were based on suspicion rather than security requirements, acknowledging that Rachel's capabilities had been consistently undervalued and underutilized. The Academy failed to recognize exceptional capability because it didn't fit our predetermined categories, Harrison admitted. Ms. Winters' performance proved that our evaluation processes needed fundamental revision to avoid missing future opportunities. Harrison's acknowledgement extended beyond professional courtesy to institutional reform. The Academy had implemented revised evaluation protocols designed to identify exceptional capabilities regardless of background or training history. Initial assessment criteria now emphasized performance over credentials, creating pathways for recognizing excellence that emerged through unconventional development approaches. Rachel's new role as advanced civilian instructor had been created specifically to utilize her unique combination of skills and independence from military training doctrine. She would work with elite units, requiring opposition that couldn't be provided by personnel trained within American military systems. The position represented validation of everything Rachel had worked toward, but it also provided opportunities to contribute to training that could enhance military effectiveness and potentially save lives in operational environments. Her shooting would serve purposes larger than personal achievement or individual recognition, exactly the kind of meaningful application her father had always emphasized as the true measure of exceptional capability. The Advanced Instruction Center had been reconfigured to support Rachel's specialized training approach. Traditional target systems had been supplemented with environmental simulation technology that created variable conditions for developing integrated skills rather than isolated techniques. Instruction areas emphasized perceptual development alongside mechanical fundamentals, reflecting the integrated methodology William had employed during Rachel's training. Master Sergeant Williams, who had been among Rachel's most vocal skeptics, approached her after the first advanced training session she'd conducted for Air Force Special Operations personnel. "Winters," he said, "I owe you an apology. Your performance today was exceptional and your contribution to that team's training was invaluable. I was wrong about your capabilities and your value to our mission." Rachel accepted the apology graciously, while recognizing that Williams's acknowledgement represented broader institutional recognition that capability could come from unexpected sources and backgrounds. The Academy was beginning to understand that excellence didn't always follow predictable paths or emerge from established systems. "Your approach to environmental reading is something we've been trying to teach for years, through conventional methods," Williams continued. "The way you integrated those concepts from the beginning, rather than treating them as advanced components, it's changing how we think about progression in skill development." The acknowledgement validated the training methodology William had employed throughout Rachel's development. Rather than separating fundamentals from advanced applications he had created, integrated learning experiences that developed technical and perceptual abilities simultaneously. This approach challenged conventional wisdom, but produced results that conventional methods struggled to match. Captain Martinez, who had consistently advocated for Rachel's recognition, had been promoted to Training Development Director with specific responsibility for identifying and incorporating exceptional civilian capabilities into military training programs. "Your success has changed how we think about civilian contributions to military training," Martinez explained during a planning meeting. "We're developing programs specifically designed to identify and utilize exceptional capabilities regardless of background or traditional credentials." Martinez spread architectural plans across the conference table designs for an expanded training facility that incorporated elements specifically designed to support Rachel's instructional approach. The new environmental simulation range will allow integrated skill development from beginning stages rather than treating environmental reading as an advanced component. This represents fundamental change in how we approach specialized training. The ripple effects of Rachel's recognition extended throughout the precision shooting community. Her performance had inspired other civilian shooters to pursue advanced training opportunities, while military programs began actively seeking civilian instructors who could provide independent assessment of their training effectiveness. Specialized publications had featured articles discussing the implications of Rachel's performance for institutional training approaches. Without revealing classified details, these analyses highlighted the potential for direct transmission methodologies to accelerate skill development beyond what conventional programs achieved. The discussion had triggered reassessment of training frameworks that had remained largely unchanged for decades. Commander Mason, who had become a mentor and advocate, regularly consulted with Rachel about training development and civilian utilization protocols. His recommendation had been instrumental in creating Rachel's instructor position and ensuring that her unique capabilities were properly recognized and utilized. "Your contribution to military training has been exceptional," Mason said during one of their regular consultation sessions. "But more importantly, you've proven that capability and dedication matter more than conventional credentials. That's a lesson that will influence training development for years." Mason had officially transferred his Barrett .50 caliber rifle to the Academy's advanced training program, ensuring that the weapon would continue serving the purpose for which William Winters had used it so effectively, creating opportunities where none seemed possible. The rifle that had saved lives under impossible circumstances would now help train the next generation of specialized operators to achieve similar capabilities. Rachel's academic studies had been modified to include independent research on precision shooting psychology and training methodologies, allowing her to combine her practical expertise with theoretical knowledge that could enhance both civilian and military marksmanship development. The university had recognized the value of her specialized knowledge, creating an interdisciplinary program that would allow her to complete her degree while contributing to research that could benefit future training approaches. Admiral Blackwell had authorized a specialized research initiative focused on documenting and analyzing the training methodologies William had employed during Rachel's development. This project, codenamed Legacy, would systematically identify transmissible components that could be incorporated into revised training protocols for specialized operators. Rachel would serve as primary consultant working with technical specialists to translate her experience into structured approaches that could benefit future generations. Most importantly, Rachel had found the perfect balance between personal development and service to larger purposes. Her shooting continued to improve through challenging applications that tested her skills while contributing to training that could enhance military readiness and effectiveness. During quiet moments at the Academy, Rachel often reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed recreational shooter to recognized expert whose capabilities were valued and utilized at the highest levels of military training. The Academy's transformation was equally significant. Rachel's recognition had forced institutional changes that ensured exceptional civilian capabilities would be identified and incorporated rather than dismissed due to unconventional backgrounds or suspicious excellence. One evening, as Rachel prepared to leave after a particularly successful training session with a specialized unit, she found Colonel Harrison waiting near her vehicle. His expression suggested personal rather than professional purpose. "I wanted to give you something," Harrison said, extending a small package wrapped in protective cloth. "Something that belongs with you more than anyone else." Rachel unwrapped the package to reveal a worn leather case containing a brass compass with a simple inscription on the back, "To find your way when others are lost, WW." "Your father carried this on every operation we conducted together," Harrison explained. "He said it wasn't for navigation, modern equipment handled that perfectly well. It was for perspective. When situations became chaotic and pressure mounted, he would hold this compass and remind himself that principles remained constant, even when circumstances changed." The simple object carried emotional significance far beyond its physical presence, a tangible connection to her father's operational philosophy and approach to excellence under pressure. William had emphasized that fundamentals remained constant, regardless of circumstances, creating reliable foundations that supported exceptional performance when conditions deteriorated. "After Ghost Shot, he gave this to me," Harrison continued. "Said I might need it more than he did. I've carried it ever since, but watching you these past weeks, seeing how perfectly you've embodied his approach to excellence, made me realize it belongs with you now." Rachel accepted the compass, feeling its weight and history in her palm. "Thank you," This means more than any official recognition. Harrison nodded, understanding that some connections transcended professional acknowledgement. Your father was the finest operator I ever served with, not just because of his technical skills, but because of his understanding that excellence exists independent of recognition. What you've demonstrated these past weeks honors that legacy in ways that would make him prouder than any commendation ever could. As Harrison walked away, Rachel examined the compass more closely, noticing subtle details that connected it directly to her father's operational history. Small marks around the edge corresponded to deployments and significant operations. The patina on the brass case showed wear patterns consistent with William's handling preferences. Even the leather case carried the distinct impression of having been carried in a specific pocket of standard-issue tactical gear. This wasn't just equipment. It was a physical manifestation of her father's operational philosophy and approach to excellence under pressure. William had carried this compass through circumstances that officially never occurred, using it not for navigation, but for the perspective that connected him to principles that remained constant regardless of changing circumstances. The compass would join the brass casing Mason had given her physical connections to a legacy that Rachel had honored through performance rather than claims. These objects represented validation beyond institutional recognition, connecting her directly to her father's operational history and the principles that had guided his approach to excellence under pressure. The morning sun climbed over the Blue Ridge Mountains as Rachel prepared for another advanced training session. Her equipment laid out with the same methodical precision that had characterized her approach from the beginning. The difference was that now, instead of being dismissed as too inexperienced, she was recognized as exactly the kind of exceptional capability that military training required. Near her position, Commander Mason's Barrett .50 caliber rifle rested in its case, the weapon that connected her directly to her father's operational legacy. Mason had officially transferred the rifle to the Academy's training program, ensuring it would continue serving the purpose for which William Winters had used it so effectively, creating opportunities where none seemed possible. On a small table nearby, the brass compass Harrison had returned sat beside the casing from Operation Ghost Shot, physical connections to a legacy that Rachel had honored through performance rather than claims. These objects represented validation beyond institutional recognition, connecting her directly to her father's operational history and the principles that had guided his approach to excellence under pressure. Rachel smiled as she chambered her first round of the day, knowing that some of the most important shots aren't the ones that hit targets, but the ones that prove what's possible when preparation meets opportunity and dedication overcomes assumptions. Her journey from outsider to instructor had demonstrated that principle with a clarity that would influence both her future and the institutional frameworks that had initially failed to recognize her potential. As Rachel prepared to welcome the day's training group, Navy SEALs, seeking to validate new operational protocols, she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that excellence had found its proper recognition not through credentials or institutional validation, but through performance when circumstances demanded exceptional results. The academy that had once restricted her access now celebrated her contributions. The instructors who had questioned her abilities now sought her insights. The institutional frameworks that had treated her as a security concern now recognized her as a valuable asset in developing the next generation of specialized capabilities. Rachel chambered her first round and settled into her shooting position, finding the familiar calm focus that had defined her approach since her father's first lessons. Today, she would help America's most elite operators refine techniques that could save lives in circumstances where normal standards proved insufficient, exactly the kind of meaningful purpose William had always emphasized as the true measure of exceptional capability. "Ranges are hot," came the announcement over the communication system. "Advanced training scenario commencing in 30 seconds. Rachel made her final preparations with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. Whatever challenges today's scenario presented, she was ready to demonstrate that excellence existed independent of institutional frameworks, revealing itself most clearly when circumstances demanded exceptional performance under conditions that pushed beyond normal parameters. The legacy her father had begun would continue through her contributions to training approaches that valued performance over credentials and capability over convention. The outsider had become the instructor, proving that true excellence needed no institutional validation to exist, only the opportunity to demonstrate what was possible when dedication and proper training combined to produce extraordinary results. "Scenario active," the range officer announced. "Engagement authorized." Rachel took her first shot of the day, beginning another chapter in a journey that had transformed not just her own status, but institutional understanding of how exceptional capabilities were developed and recognized. The lesson would continue influencing both military training and civilian shooting long after today's session concluded, a legacy worthy of the standards William Winters had established and his daughter had so definitively validated. The morning sun gleamed on the Barrett's barrel as Rachel demonstrated techniques that transcended conventional training, proving once again that true excellence revealed itself not through credentials but through performance when circumstances demanded exceptional results, a principle that would guide both her future contributions and the institutional approaches her journey had helped transform. Chapter 14. A New Generation. 1 year after Rachel's formal recognition at the Appalachia Precision Shooting Academy, she stood at the observation position of the newly constructed Environmental Integration Range at Naval Special Warfare's Advanced Training Facility in Virginia Beach. The state-of-the-art installation had been designed specifically to implement the training methodologies she had helped document and systematize approaches based on William Winters's accelerated skill transmission techniques. The facility represented physical manifestation of institutional change triggered by Rachel's performance. Traditional separation between basic and advanced training areas had been replaced by integrated spaces that allowed simultaneous development of mechanical fundamentals and environmental reading capabilities. Technical equipment monitored performance metrics that would have been ignored under conventional approaches, creating datasets that validated the effectiveness of Williams' methodologies. Admiral Blackwell stood beside Rachel, observing the first graduating class from the APEX program, 12 specialized operators who had completed the experimental training curriculum based on Rachel's documented experiences. These men represented diverse backgrounds and previous training histories, selected specifically to test whether Williams' methodologies could be effectively transmitted through structured programs rather than individual instruction. "The results exceed even our most optimistic projections," Blackwell said, reviewing performance data on a specialized tablet. Average qualification scores 37% higher than conventional program graduates. Environmental compensation capabilities consistent with operators having 5 additional years of field experience. Adaptation to unfamiliar equipment, 42% faster than control groups. The statistical validation confirmed what Rachel had demonstrated through personal performance. Williams' training approach produced results that conventional methodologies couldn't match. By integrating environmental reading from the beginning stages, rather than treating it as an advanced component, the program developed perceptual abilities alongside mechanical skills, creating unified capabilities rather than separated components. What's most significant isn't just the improved performance metrics, Blackwell continued. It's the accelerated timeline. These operators achieved in 8 months what typically requires 3 years of specialized training and field experience. That kind of compression has operational implications we're only beginning to understand. Rachel watched as the graduating operators completed their final qualification exercise precision engagement under conditions specifically designed to challenge environmental reading capabilities. Multiple wind channels, variable light conditions, and atmospheric distortion created circumstances where conventional approaches would prove insufficient. These operators navigated these challenges with capabilities that matched experienced veterans, demonstrating that Williams' methodologies had been successfully transmitted through structured programs. Commander Mason approached from the instructional area, having supervised the final qualification process. His expression conveyed professional satisfaction with results that validated operational theories he had long supported. "These men aren't just shooting better," Mason said. "They're processing environmental information differently, reading conditions as integrated systems rather than isolated variables. That's exactly what distinguished your father's approach from conventional methodologies." Mason gestured toward one operator in particular, a young lieutenant whose background included conventional sniper training before entering the experimental program. "Davidson there was among our most skeptical participants initially, said he couldn't understand why we were challenging fundamentals that had worked for decades. Now, he's outperforming instructors with twice his experience because he's learned to process information differently." The validation extended beyond statistical metrics to operational application. These operators would carry capabilities into field environments that conventional training struggled to develop, even through extended programs. The accelerated timeline meant specialized units could develop critical capabilities more efficiently, enhancing operational effectiveness while reducing training resources. Colonel Harrison had joined the APEX program as senior advisor, bringing his experience with both conventional methodologies and Williams' specialized techniques. He approached Rachel and Blackwell carrying the performance analysis from the graduation exercise. "Final qualification results confirm consistent pattern across all participants," Harrison reported. "Environmental compensation capabilities exceed established standards by significant margins. More importantly, the integration of technical and perceptual skills creates adaptability that conventional approaches can't match." Harrison had undergone his own transformation during the program's development, from institutional defender to advocate for methodologies that challenged conventional frameworks. His experience with William during actual operations had provided context that technical specialists lacked, helping translate Rachel's experiences into structured approaches that maintained the essence of Williams' methodology while creating transmissible components. "What's most significant about these results," Harrison continued, "is that they validate Williams' fundamental insight. Exceptional performance requires integrated development rather than sequential progression. By teaching environmental reading alongside mechanical fundamentals rather than treating them as separate components, we've created capabilities that conventional approaches can't match." Rachel nodded, recognizing validation of exactly what her father had emphasized throughout her development. William had never separated technical skills from perceptual abilities, creating integrated learning experiences that developed both simultaneously. This approach had challenged conventional wisdom, but produced results that traditional methods couldn't achieve. As the graduation exercise concluded, Rachel prepared to address the first class of operators trained through methodologies she had helped develop. These men represented physical validation of Williams' approach to skill transmission, proof that his methods could be systematized and implemented through structured programs rather than remaining isolated techniques known only to those he had personally trained. "Gentlemen," Rachel began, as the operators gathered for their final briefing, "what you've accomplished these past months goes beyond improved shooting metrics or qualification scores. You've demonstrated that excellence can be developed through approaches that challenge conventional wisdom when those approaches are founded on proper principles." Rachel gestured toward the environmental integration range where they had just completed their qualification exercise. "The techniques you've learned aren't valuable because some programs certified them. They're valuable because they work when circumstances demand exceptional performance. That's the standard that matters in operational environments where lives depend on your capabilities." The operators listened with the focused attention of men who had experienced transformation through methodologies that challenged everything they had previously been taught. Their initial skepticism had given way to validation through performance, exactly the kind of evidence that mattered most in communities where results carried more weight than institutional theories. The capabilities you've developed aren't exceptional because they're rare, Rachel continued. They're exceptional because they're effective when conditions push beyond what conventional approaches can handle. That effectiveness is what makes them valuable, not institutional certification or traditional validation. As Rachel concluded her remarks, she felt deep satisfaction in knowing that her father's legacy extended far beyond her personal development. Williams' methodologies would now influence how specialized capabilities were developed throughout military and intelligence communities, transforming institutional approaches that had remained largely unchanged for decades. After the formal graduation ceremony, Rachel found herself standing alone at the observation position, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from dismissed outsider to recognized expert, whose insights were transforming how elite capabilities were developed. The institutional frameworks that had initially rejected her now implemented methodologies based on her documented experiences, validating everything her father had taught about how genuine excellence was created and transmitted. Admiral Blackwell approached carrying a formal document bearing official seals and signatures. The Secretary has authorized expansion of the APEX program to additional special operations components, Blackwell said, handing Rachel the authorization. Based on these results, we'll be implementing these methodologies across specialized training platforms throughout the service branches. The formal expansion represented institutional validation at the highest levels. Acknowledgement that Williams' approach to skill transmission offered advantages that conventional methodologies couldn't match. What had begun as personal instruction between father and daughter would now influence how America's most elite operators developed specialized capabilities for generations to come. There's something else, Blackwell continued, producing a second document. The Defense Special Programs Office has authorized declassification of specific elements from Project Apex, the original research program that documented your father's capabilities. This will allow broader implementation of these methodologies without security restrictions that limited previous applications. The declassification represented final validation of Williams' approach, recognition that these methodologies deserved wider implementation than security classifications had previously permitted. What had once been treated as classified techniques would now become established approaches available to training programs throughout specialized communities. Your father would be proud, Blackwell said, not just of your personal achievements, but of how you've helped transform institutional understanding of skill development and transmission. These methodologies will influence how we approach specialized training for generations. As Blackwell departed, Rachel remained at the observation position, watching as the newly graduated operators gathered their equipment and prepared for deployment to units where their enhanced capabilities would serve operational objectives. These men represented living validation of everything William had believed about how excellence was developed, not through institutional certification, but through approaches that integrated technical and perceptual abilities from the beginning. Commander Mason joined Rachel at the observation position, his expression reflecting professional satisfaction with results that validated operational theories he had long supported. "I've been thinking about something your father once told me during a deployment," Mason said. "He said the most valuable shots aren't the ones that hit targets, but the ones that create opportunities where none existed before." The assessment captured Williams' operational philosophy perfectly. His exceptional shooting had never been about personal achievement, but about creating possibilities that standard approaches deemed impossible. That philosophy now extended through Rachel's contributions to training methodologies that would influence institutional approaches for generations. The Barrett is being transferred to the Apex program's permanent equipment inventory, Mason continued. It will be used for final qualification exercises, a tangible connection to the operational history that influenced these methodologies. Each graduating class will fire their final qualification shot with the same rifle your father used to create opportunities that saved lives under impossible circumstances. The decision ensured that William's legacy would continue influencing future generations in both philosophical and tangible ways. The rifle that had saved lives during operations that officially never occurred would now help develop capabilities in operators who would carry those skills into circumstances where lives again hung in the balance. As Mason departed, Rachel remained alone at the observation position, reflecting on the journey that had transformed not just her own status, but institutional understanding of how elite capabilities were developed and transmitted. The outsider, who had been dismissed and restricted, had become instrumental in changing approaches that had remained unchallenged for decades. Whatever the future held, Rachel had validated everything her father had taught her about genuine excellence and how it was created. True capability revealed itself not through credentials or institutional certification, but through performance, when circumstances demanded exceptional results under conditions where standard approaches proved insufficient. The sun set over the Virginia Beach training facility, casting long shadows across ranges designed to implement methodologies based on William Winters's approach to skill transmission. Rachel smiled as she prepared to depart, knowing that some journeys create impacts far beyond their original destinations. Her path from dismissed outsider to recognized expert had transformed not just her own status, but institutional understanding that would influence generations of specialized operators. The legacy would continue through capabilities developed in men and women who would never know William Winters personally but would carry his methodological influence into operational environments where lives depended on exceptional performance under impossible conditions. That living legacy represented validation beyond any institutional recognition, proof that genuine excellence needed no certification to exist or create impact that extended far beyond individual achievement. As Rachel walked toward her vehicle, she carried her father's compass in her pocket, a tangible reminder that principles remained constant even when circumstances changed. The simple object connected her directly to William's operational philosophy and approach to excellence under pressure, reminding her that fundamentals mattered more than conditions when performance determined outcomes that transcended individual achievement. The journey had come full circle, transforming institutional understanding through personal excellence that challenged conventional wisdom. The most important lesson remained exactly what William had emphasized throughout Rachel's development. True capability revealed itself not through credentials, but through performance when circumstances demanded exceptional results. A principle that would continue guiding both her future contributions and the institutional approaches her journey had helped transform.